G'day, mate. 40 here. I've become obsessed with what's going on with Israel and its seven front war, trying to understand it from different perspectives. What the heck really happened with Iran's missile strike last Tuesday? Because I don't know what pictures you saw, but it seemed to me, just looking at the pictures, that 90% of Iran's missile attacks got through. Yet the official reports are that the Iranian attacks did very little damage, that 90% of them, 99% of them did not get through. Washington Post reports that up to 30 of the Iranian missiles got through. But if you just look, right, you just use your lying eyes, it appears that about 90% of the Iranian missiles got through. Now, I'm not an expert at decoding footage, but it looks to me like 90% of the Iranian missiles got through. It's entirely conceivable to me that Iran did far more damage than is officially acknowledged by Israel. I mean, Israel is not incentivized to tell the truth about how much damage that Iran did to it. And so we've got Washington Post here. Iran's missile attack on Israel this week stood out for its large scope and its limited impact. So according to this Washington Post analysis, at least 24 Iranian missiles made it through Israeli defenses on Tuesday. It sure looks to me like far more than 24 made it through. And Steve Zhu, a physicist, he talks about this, and he reckons that, it sure looks like about 90% of the Iranian missiles got through. And so what are the implications of that for Israel? Perhaps is Israel more vulnerable to Iranian missile attack than we've been told? Is that perhaps a reason why Israel has delayed striking back? So Steve Zhu writes, the evidence is strong that Iran overwhelmed Israeli defenses. This suggests that Russia and China will be able to overwhelm the comparatively weaker missile defense systems of U.S. aircraft carrier groups with their more advanced anti-ship ballistic and hypersonic missiles. Also suggests that U.S. bases in the Pacific as well as in Iraq are highly vulnerable. What will a further escalation in an Iran-Israel conflict look like? Israel, with U.S. assistance, can bomb Iranian and oil and gas infrastructure, but Iran's nuclear program is probably deep below ground and cannot be easily destroyed. Iran can attack Israel's nuclear reactors and other key infrastructure with missiles. Both countries would likely suffer serious setbacks, but unless Israel uses its nukes, neither can completely defeat the other. It appears the Russians will assist the Iranians, and Israeli pilots may face Russian air defense systems. If the U.S. gets directly involved, all bets are off. So if you want to claim that Israel had a 90% overall intercept rate against these Iranian missiles, you have to explain why none of the videos show such a high rate of missile interception. All right, it sure looks like a lot of Iranian missiles get through. So what are the implications here? Because just looking at the video, it appears that Iran had far more success than we've been told publicly. So let's get some analysis here from Michael Doran.
The thing I think that struck all of us was how vulnerable Israel was. I mean, we really thought of Israel as having one of the 5 most powerful militaries in the world. We thought of Hamas as the weakest link in the what Iran calls its resistance axis against the West and against Israel. But the October 7th attack revealed that Israel was completely unprepared for that war, the war with Hamas. And as we watched Israel move into Gaza and have difficulty, really a lot of difficulty in taking total control of it, suppressing the fire from Hamas and so on, I think our sense of Israel's power diminished significantly. At least it certainly did for me. But then in the last couple of months, since April, there's been a dramatic reversal. And we see that while the IDF was totally unprepared for the war with Hamas, it was very well prepared for the war with Hezbollah. And for good reason, for good strategic reason, that Hezbollah is really the most potent enemy that Israel has from within Iran's resistance axis, even more potent than Iran itself, because of the numbers of rockets, drones, ballistic missiles, and because of the proximity of Hezbollah to of Lebanon to Israel, and also the experience that the Hezbollah fighters have had in the Syrian civil war. And so in the last couple of months, with all of these targeted assassinations that Israel has conducted, with the killing of Nasrallah, with the entry into Lebanon, we really see that it has turned the tables, not just on Hezbollah, but on Iran more broadly. And that's what really strikes me now, is that how Iran is rather naked before Israeli power, in a way that I would not have predicted at all just a couple of months ago. So as we're approaching the anniversary, I'm much more optimistic about Israel's prospects than I was, say, in November or December of last year.
Yeah, and so just to stay on this.
Okay, let's have a look at the chat. How many of these Iranian missiles simply landed in open field? So there is a way to reconcile your lying eyes with journalism reports and official reports, and that is, yes, more Iranian missiles got through than you might have expected with Israel's Iron Dome defenses, but those missiles that got through overwhelmingly landed in open fields and did no damage. If any critical infrastructure or civilian targets were hit, you think Israel would be able to hide that at all? No, not necessarily. So we seem to have a lot of Iranian missiles landing at Israeli Air Force bases. And we don't have any direct evidence of Israel suffering severe damage from these attacks. It appears that Iran sought to minimize civilian casualties, that Iran directed these missiles at Israeli military targets. So if Iran wanted to maximize civilian casualties, would they act quite differently?
Israeli military was built on the assumption that wars of the kind that it's having in Gaza, or the kind that the Ukrainians are having with the Russians in Ukraine, were really a thing of the past. That is, wars with large...
So wars are, well, way to understand it in part, that they are the result of different types of information, right? How much knowledge do you have? Because if you have an accurate knowledge of your capabilities versus the enemy's capability, then you're not going to have war, right? You're going to have some kind of accommodation. But you get war when the various parties disagree about their own capabilities versus the enemy's capabilities. And Israel did not have the victory that it sought in its 2006 war in Lebanon. And Israel learned that its strategy of being able to just get everything done through air power, right, it was not really going to get it done going forward.
Large armor formations that use up with a very high tempo, that use up a lot of ammunition quickly, that are basically struggles for territory. These kinds of wars.
Israel is not well equipped to fight an ongoing war, right? Israeli wars in the past have been quite quick, right? Israel does much better on the offensive than the defensive. So the longer these wars go on, the worse it is for Israel's economy. So can Israel remake the Middle East? Can Israel crush Hezbollah so that Lebanon can reassert control over Hezbollah? Can the Lebanese army become more powerful than Hezbollah? If so, that would be a massive victory for Israel. And can Israel facilitate regime change in Iran? According to the polls that I see, about 80% of Iranians don't like the Islamist regime that's been ruling it for the past 45 years. So what would regime change look like in Iran? And can Israel help to facilitate that? Or on the other hand, the more Israel goes to war with Iran, the normal natural response would be to rally around your nation against the enemy. So increased Iranian nationalism would probably unite the Iranian people against Israel and provide more support, increased support for the Islamist regime.
Wars are really a thing of the past, and war these days is really against non-state actors and can be won by the combination of air power, special forces, and high-tech enabled intelligence. And that was the doctrine. That's not just the doctrine of the Israeli military. I think the Israeli...
Okay, Dooovid has some interesting thoughts in the chat. He says, Israel's strategy is based mostly on bluff, and the axis of resistance is willing to call that bluff. So Dooovid says, Israel's defensive doctrine is based on escalatory deterrence theory, basically scaring the enemy of what Israel might do to them. So Israel, to restore deterrence, needs a credible threat of being able to completely destroy their enemy should they be pushed, which is obviously a bluff. Israel does not have that capacity. Well, they do. They have nuclear capacity, but the stigma and the sanctions of other countries against Israel using nuclear weapons would be enormous.
Military went for it whole hog, but that was the doctrine of all Western armies, and that's why they were unprepared for Gaza. But those doctrines, those capabilities, they're proving highly effective against Hezbollah up until this point. We have to wait and see if they've gone into Lebanon. Hezbollah has always said to the Israelis, "We're ready for the ground war. You're not. You're not going to be able to take over southern Lebanon." We have to wait and see if there was any truth to that. I happen to believe Hezbollah on that because of the experience of the Israelis in the 2006 war. And because of what we saw in Gaza, I started to believe that actually there was probably a lot of truth to that, and Israel was going to have an enormous amount of difficulty taking the territory that it needed to take in southern Lebanon in order to ensure security for its northern border. But I think what we've seen in the last couple of months against Hezbollah for sure is something I never predicted, never saw coming. And that's that Israel could basically decapitate the organization. And it has really done that. If you look at the org chart of Hezbollah, they're gone. Yeah. All those guys are gone.
Nobody predicted that Israel would have the number of stunning successes that it has enjoyed over the past few weeks. But does this amount to a winning strategy? His pro-Israel analysis pointing out 5 reasons why Israel's 7-front war is so hard to win. Right, in the first place, right, Israel's fighting a 7-front war. To the south, there is Gaza, then there is Hamas. There is the Houthis in Yemen. To the north, in Lebanon, you've got Hezbollah, you've got Syria, you've got Iran. Hezbollah is down, but not out. Right, it still has a considerable fighting force and a considerable arsenal. And then Israel does not have decisive attack options against Iran's nuclear program without direct support from the U.S. Air Force. U.S. power in the Middle East is steadily declining. And does the United States have strong strategic reasons for staying in the Middle East? I'm skeptical of that. I think it may be entirely in America's best interest to withdraw from the Middle East. And how would Israel survive if America withdrew from the Middle East? The clock is ticking on Israel's economy. Right, keeping the army in the field mobilized at such a high rate and people out of their jobs is going to be devastating. So let's bring Dooovid back into the show. Dooovid, what do you want to say? What do you want to weigh in on?
Yeah, well, Lashana Tova, blessings. Following this very intensely, and I guess I'm phrasing it more as Israel's bluff, which I think, considering Israel's situation, they really have no choice but to carry on this bluff. And, the bluff has multiple factors, because there's the bluff to the Israeli and the Jewish population and the American Zionist supporters that Israel is capable of self-perpetuation and protecting its own citizens, which, might be a bluff that they have no choice but to, carry through on. And then there's the bluff about how much damage, how much ability do they actually have to defeat their enemy. And you could say, like destroying Hamas was a bluff. Even many of Israelis' own commanders, experts said you're never going to be able to destroy Hamas, but Israel still is carrying on with the bluff that Hamas is going to be completely destroyed. And now this has escalated with basically all of the regional foes. And Israel's strategy, largely from its existence, has been escalatory, dominance. Basically saying like, you hit us, we're going to hit you 10 times harder. And because they had the weapons agreement with the United States, or Jewish uh, ingenuity in engineering or weapons, the bluff escalatory strategy has worked somewhat decently, although I think most military experts say it's never really worked. And now Israel has basically put itself in an all or nothing situation where the only way out of this war is to successfully defeat all their enemies, including a regime change in Iran, which basically seems completely infeasible. And so they came up with this kind of ridiculous strategy: escalate to de-escalate, which I guess somehow to go back to the status quo, but to deliver such a devastating blow that when they de-escalate, return to the status quo, that somehow they could still call it a victory. Which I mean, there's so many unknowns. Like, what happened with Iran? How damaging was it? Did they hit a military base? Did they destroy airplanes? Economic damage? And like, if you realize, like, there's no way to know as a Jew or someone following the news, even as an Israeli, uh, there's really no way to know the accurate piece of information. And it just puts you in a difficult situation. So either they're purposely hiding things from their own citizens, and you analyze why would they be doing that, or then this question, like, is Iran really completely incapable? Is there missile attack, or and you're saying, well, that's a pretty dangerous bluff for Israel to be messing around with.
Right. So I would think that the longer that Israel waits to retaliate against Iran for its ballistic missile attack, probably that indicates that the more vulnerable that Israel realizes that it is vis-a-vis Iran. That perhaps the Iranian attacks on Tuesday were more devastating than we've been led to believe. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, just looking at the video analysis, and then also kind of like this, the Israeli propaganda where, Israel is the moral who's strategically striking military targets and trying to avoid civilian casualties, when there might be significant evidence that it's actually the other way around, where Israel is much willing to inflict high levels of civilian casualties, and that maybe that's even their strategy to collectively cause pain to get the other side to submit, as where maybe Iran or even Hezbollah is more cautious about attacking civilian targets. And then also just recognizing like Iran's strategic patient strategy, and that Iran might, even Hezbollah, they could lose possibly every single tactical battle, but win the strategic war. Just because Israel cannot afford to be at war long term, and Hezbollah could basically afford to always be at war, and Iran, if they could, keep the war from, coming to them, and at the proxy level, basically the longer this lasts, the worse it is for Israel. That's why you see Israel at this point trying to escalate, and just like Elliot saying, like, well, yeah, I mean, the bluff. I'm just saying they're implying their hand is better than it is, and so it's like they're at the table, and Israel's like, I'm all in. And if you're Hezbollah or Iran, you're saying, are you going to call their bluff? And what does it mean that Israel's all in? And it's also kind of this bluff that, like, Israel would like you to think that they could defend themselves and beat all of their foes even without the US's help. And like that bluff very clearly seems to have been called. And so it's probably a combination of like saving face, where President Biden's going to allow Israel to do some sort of retaliatory strike that damages some sort of infrastructure for Israel to save face, and hope that Iran doesn't, retaliate back. And then also, what's the game plan in um, Lebanon? Like, if they're doing a ground invasion, why are they bombing Beirut? And what's the end term game plan? Where they basically are going to fall into some sort of like, well, we have to completely destroy Hezbollah in order for the people to safely be able to return to the north. And I'll call this this bluff that most people think that it's impossible for Israel to destroy Hezbollah. And then are they even going to be in a better situation a few months from now if they've even they've minimized the amount of harm that Hezbollah could do, but they're still intact and they have more incentive to go back. And then it decreases Israel's credibility, to say a year later they haven't been able to defeat Hamas. And now, at some point, what are their gains actually in Lebanon, causing another refugee crisis, killing, who knows how many more civilians that, unfortunately, I'm very pessimistic about the Israeli side of this.
So Israel was able to return tens of thousands of its citizens to the south of Israel because they felt confident that the IDF had Hamas under control. I'm not aware of Hamas sending many rockets into Israel over the past few months. So if Israel is able to return thousands of its citizens to the north, then that would be a strong sign that Israel has a strategy that's working. Would you agree, disagree with that?
Well, if you say that's the number one objective of Israel, say like, okay, like it's a little bit bluff. Like obviously they know they're not going to be able to, destroy Hezbollah. They're not going to be able to do a full invasion into Lebanon, and they just need to get the people back up north. But the problem is, it's a much different situation than Gaza. Like, there's still a few rockets. Maybe the people have largely returned to the places outside of Gaza, but do they feel safe? Are they, have they restored security, levels of Israel's competence in keeping them safe? Does it require a indefinite occupation of Gaza to do it? And if Israel just pulled out right now, that Hamas would instantly regain control, and those communities would not be safe. Like however many tens of thousands of Israeli soldiers right now are active in Gaza, is that indefinitely going to need them for that security? And the question whether they could even provide. But I would say that would be the main benefit, to Israel, is when they start being able to return some of the people up north. And but I don't see the capacity in the same way for them to, like, that's why they're doing the ground invasion. They would have to completely take over all of that territory up to the Litani River to ensure that rockets aren't coming down to those areas.
Right. So I never said that returning its citizens to the north was Israel's number one goal. Israel's number one goal surely must be survival, and survival may necessitate keeping tens of thousands of its citizens away from the north for an indefinite amount of time. But it has to be among the goals of Israel. And in such a complicated war as Israel is in right now, it's useful to look for definitive ways of measuring Israel's progress. So I think feet on the ground, right? Where do people choose to live is particularly valuable because that's concrete. And so Israel has suffered a population drain since the October 7 attack. So if that population drain, particularly with its best and brightest, continues, that will be devastating. On the other hand, if more Jews return to Israel to live, that would be a sign that Jews, particularly its best and brightest, feel safe in Israel. Let's bring Kip into the conversation. Kip, anything that you've heard that you want to comment on?
No, I'm just catching up right now. Y'all finish your point there.
Okay, so you'll have to jump in when you're ready. So I'll leave it to you to announce that you're ready. Dooovid, do you agree that feet on the ground, right? Israelis willing to stay in Israel or to move to Israel is a great measure of whether Israel's strategies are working or failing?
Well, it's some indication, but I mean, God forbid that could be, if things have gotten so bad in other countries that people are going to Israel despite the war, because anti-Semitism has risen so much. I mean, you could have alternative explanation. I mean, it's tough to, if you're looking at quantifiable military objectives versus psychological sentiment, and you have the economic, the political indicators. But I would question what happens if Israel can't safely return the people to the north, and this war, consider however gets named in the future, is a war where Israel lost territory, and then even conceivably that Israel has to make concessions to move forward and get a ceasefire that includes conceding territory on the northern border. And most Israelis and Jews would be absolutely not, under no circumstances. That's why we're expanding the war. But if these don't turn out to be successful, they don't have the deterrence capability. Then you start looking at it. Well, should Israel cede territory on the northern border to return to some state of normalcy?
Well, what are some indices that you look to that would provide a measure of whether Israel's winning or losing? Because you don't seem to like or respect any objective indices, because for you this question is already settled. Israel's losing, and that's the end of it, and you have no interest in any indications to the contrary.
Well, there's all sorts of measures. I mean, if you're just looking pure military, quantifiable measures, I mean, there's obviously like economical or political sentiment, but just the pure military objectives. As of now, Israel has ceded territory in the north that they haven't been able to recapture, and they've caused a lot of damage to Hamas. So you could say that that's some indication of success that I wouldn't validate because of the way that they did it. But on the northern border, I would say, like, if it stopped right now, that Israel is clearly, objectively, according to almost all measures, besides for like a kill rate of maybe more Hezbollah, people are dead than Israelis, that Israel has clearly lost territory.
Okay, so we're all biased by our own internal states. My internal state is fairly optimistic and happy, so I'm looking for reasons to stay happy. And so I very well have a more sanguine, more positive read on what's going on with Israel than the facts on the ground. To what extent are your own internal states perhaps some depression affecting the way that you are viewing the Israeli conflicts?
I mean, it's possible I'm more pessimistic in general. Then obviously, since I've been staked, kind of myself as an anti-Zionist for over 20 years, that maybe I have some sort of see, I told you so type. You can't get away with this. So I've been saying this for 20 years, and now that the war is breaking out and Israel not being able to win the war, losing territory, might vindicate the position that I've staked myself on unpopular for 20 years now.
Okay. Anything else that you want to add before I move on, Dooovid?
No, I guess Shana Tova, glad you're talking about this. God bless.
Okay, thanks, Dooovid. Okay, so Kip, you'll jump in when you're ready to say something. Meanwhile, let me find out. I love this overall analysis here from Jonah Goldberg. Yes, I love something Jonah Goldberg saying here.
Progressive era a little while ago, and I'll give you my very quick how to understand progressivism in the 20th century spiel. The argument always moves to the shortest path to power. So Woodrow Wilson, when he was a young man, was writing about how Congress should be the supreme branch because he kind of thought he might be the Speaker of the House. Then when he decides he's going to be more likely to be president, he thinks the president should have unalloyed power. They liked the imperial presidency for as long as they controlled the presidency. And then the argument turned towards direct democracy and primaries because they thought that's how they could have power. When the imperial presidency, they went back to the imperial presidency with FDR because that was the shortest route to get to results. This outcome-oriented kind of thing. And then when they lost the imperial presidency, the argument was no, the Supreme Court should drive everything. The argument always moves to what is the most expeditious path to get to the things that you want. The problem I have with a lot of people on the right now is all they're doing is borrowing that argument, that approach to things. And it's all politics as the crow flies, as Michael Oakeshott would say. And let's just get the best path is the one that provides the shortest path to get what we want and to own the libs kind of thing. And so when you're talking about like this argument going back and forth about hypocrisy about packing the court, I very much look forward to. We don't know if it's going to happen. We can talk about directionally right that the Democrats are starting to have an advantage in the Electoral College. We're all of a sudden going to see a lot of Republicans say how terrible the Electoral College is. I like the Electoral College, even though like there are some reforms that I would be in favor of. But it is this nearest weapon to hand kind of thing that poisons so much of our politics, because it's impossible to have a good faith argument with somebody if they're going to change their position based upon what is most expedient for their team to win the next fight. And I think that's what we've got all over the place. And the thing that makes it infuriating to discuss is Republicans are absolutely right about Democratic hypocrisy on 1,000 different things. And Republicans are hypocritical for criticizing it because the Democrats can criticize them too. When each side keeps switching sides on judicial appointments, on the filibuster, on 100 different things, they're both hypocrites. And it doesn't make they're not being a hypocrite by pointing out the other side's hypocrisy.
So now we'll move on to a segment called Not Worth Your Time, ?
So is prioritizing your principles over your interests, is that a luxury belief? Because if you're fighting for survival, right, wouldn't you be primarily interested in what is the shortest route to power? So I think there's a strong argument can be made in certain situations you should prioritize your principles over your interests. And in other situations, particularly the more dire the situation, you should prioritize your interests over your principles. And should not your interests be in and of themselves the most powerful principle guiding your life? Let's get a burst here of media buzz from Howard Kurtz.
Days after losing the VP debate to JD Vance, Tim Walz, in damage control mode, does his first national solo TV interview. That wrapped just 90 minutes ago. Fox's Shannon Bream asked about a Minnesota law allowing abortions through the 9th month. The governor said he just wants to restore Roe v. Wade.
This puts the decision with the woman and her health care providers. Donald Trump's asking for a nationwide abortion ban.
Wait, he has said that he has said repeatedly that he will not sign a national abortion ban.
And when asked about falsehoods and exaggerations in his military record and other issues,
they disparage everyone. The personal attacks. I will own up when I misspeak.
Donald Trump's running mate has been giving interviews all the time, doing podcasts, holding news conferences, the best kind of preparation for the CBS debate. Kamala Harris's running mate has been bubble wrapped, kept away from journalists until today. And the CBS moderators, Norah O'Donnell and Margaret Brennan, were much tougher on Vance. Walz effectively counterpunched at times, but he often meandered till he got to his main point. Here is JD Vance on abortion expressing sympathy for the pro-Trump side.
We've got to do so much better of a job at earning the American people's trust back on this issue where they frankly just don't trust us.
We're pro-freedom to make your own choice. We know what the implications are.
Walz's worst moment, media reports that he lied about being in China for the Tiananmen Square protests when he actually got there months later.
I've not been perfect, and I'm a knucklehead at times.
And he had to be pressed to admit he misspoke. Vance's worst moment, January 6th.
Senator Vance, you have said you would not have certified the last presidential election and would have asked the states to submit alternative electors. That has been called unconstitutional and illegal.
Remember, he said that on January the 6th, the protesters ought to protest peacefully. And on January the 20th, what happened? Joe Biden became the president. Donald Trump left the White House.
140 police officers were beaten at the Capitol that day, some with the American flag. Several later died.
And CBS fact-checked Vance, despite saying it would try to avoid the practice.
And just to clarify for our viewers, Springfield, Ohio does have a large number of Haitian migrants who have legal status, temporary protected.
The rules were that you guys weren't going to fact check.
The face-off may not have that much impact on the campaign, but it's probably the last debate of this shortened race. I'm Howard Kurtz, and this is Media Buzz.
So trying to explain January 6th and get Donald Trump off the hook for his horrible behavior after the 2020 election, that was a big ask for JD Vance. I don't envy him.
Reaction was, of course, decidedly mixed.
Tim Walz did not seem prepared for it. He didn't respond to a lot of the criticisms and attacks that Vance put on the table.
The moderators were obnoxious and made it feel like 3-on-1 on Vance, and Vance was just fine.
JD Vance was very clarifying at the end of this debate. And he told viewers everywhere that was watching, if you hate American democracy, when things don't go your way, vote for me.
JD Vance spent the night sort of building an intricate and beautiful fort out of toothpicks, and it was perfect. And at the end, he sneezed on it. The whole thing fell apart.
And it was amazing, the split-screen difference between a competent Vance and a totally in-over-his-head Walz.
Joining us now to analyze the coverage in Nashville, Tommy Lahren, host of the Tommy.
Poorly in that debate against JD Vance that he had to do something. And I do give him credit for coming on Fox News. Listen, I wish Kamala Harris would also come on Fox News and give a couple interviews. As we know, highly watched network. And I'm not just saying it because you're my employer, but Fox News is a highly watched network. So I give Tim Walz credit for coming on Fox News Sunday, having difficult conversations. The interview appears to be probably something that he's not used to, which is a little bit of back and forth. He's actually being pressed on maybe some more of his lies. We got one press during that debate on one of his lies, but there's many more. And just saying that you're a knucklehead at times or grammar's not your best thing, I don't think that's going to get him out of it with Shannon.
Okay. All right, Kip, welcome back to the show. What's going on, man?
Oh, man, I had some technical difficulties. Did you and Dooovid finish up?
Yes.
Oh, man, I'm sorry. I was kind of want to talk to him too, but really for some reason, you've been weighing heavy on my heart the last few days. Something about your soul being trapped in matter. And I ought to give you I don't know, one more chance. It may be attaching yourself to something, because when you're talking with Dooovid, I think that's so terrestrial. And I guess it being Sunday, I'm thinking along the lines of celestial. And I don't know, doggone it, you're smart enough. You got Christian teaching as well as Judaism, teaching from Judaism. And one of the keys to being able to see through things is that comparative religious study. I don't know. You mind if we talk a little bit about this morning?
Please, go ahead. I'll just respond to your worry that my soul is trapped in matter. Well, all souls are trapped in matter. We live in a physical world. And so it's hard for me to believe that we should just strive to leave the world that we inhabit as much as possible for a mystical world. That would seem to be a maladaptive evolutionary strategy.
Right. I was thinking the other day, about the life of a mayfly, what that must be like. If you ever seen a mayfly, they got these intricate eyes with what looks like 1,000 little lenses or more on each eye. They got these antennas, they can fly, they can do all these wondrous things. In my mind, there must be some drill instructor the morning that the larvas turn into flies. There must be some drill instructor standing around going, boys, this is a big day. This is a big day. You've got one day to get out there and do it all. And, you and I, Luke, we know there's probably a lot of raping going on because those mayflies, they only live for about a day. But, man, that must be some kind of experience to try to put a whole lifetime in a day, And that's, I guess, what a mayfly has to do. I guess that's what something like a morning glory has to do. And you and me, we've had 58 years. But I was thinking back to that when you were probably about 10 or 11, that that movie Star Wars came out. And a lot of people catch on to some of the mystical things about that, as far as like the hero's journey and all that kind of stuff that was popularized so much by Joseph Campbell. But you remember seeing there was a character called Obi-Wan Kenobi?
Vaguely aware. I saw the movie about 10 years ago.
Yeah, there was a character in that movie. Now, I'm talking about from the 70s, maybe 77, this movie. But there was a character called like Ben Kenobi. And he was like this Buddhist monk character that was teaching this Skywalker kid something he called the Force. And I know like that sounds out there. But that right there is kind of what I was wanting to talk to you about. Is something I think in the light of it might be Spiritus Mundi, the spirit of the world. And, you know, the mystery religions are long gone. You know, I've told you this stuff used to be more well known, but going back to the time of Babylon, if you've ever seen that guy Irvin Finkel there at the British Museum of Natural History, they pull out them old blocks from thousands of years ago, and what ought to surprise you is how many spells.
Okay, Kip, we're losing you.
And hexes and
We got technical issues on your end.
incantation.
Okay, Kip, I gotta kick you. There are just too many technical issues. Come back when you have more secure Wi-Fi. So can't really hear you. So obviously there are advantages to checking out from reality and blissing out in contemplation of the divine, but there are also disadvantages in checking out from reality and blissing out to contemplation of the divine, in that it makes you too heavenly minded to be much earthly good. So if you're a normal person embedded in a life with friends and family and community, a great deal of time spent checking out of reality in contemplation of the divine is not going to be an adaptive strategy. So I would expect, generally speaking, the more desperate your circumstances. So Jews turned to Kabbalah, to Jewish mysticism, in large numbers only when their situation was desperate. When their situation was not desperate, they by and large did not turn to mysticism. So for most people, most of the time, a non-mystical approach to life, I think, is more adaptive. If you are in the most dire of circumstances, then a more adaptive approach, right, may be checking out and contemplating the bliss of heaven and the wonders of the divine. But that does require checking out of reality and essentially abandoning your efforts to try to make the world a better place. Okay.
Hassan, gone. You know, the only guy left is Naim Qassem. He's the number 2, but he's a nobody. He's a perpetual spokesman. He's the perpetual number 2. The poor guy, if the Safiya Din, who's now the heir apparent to Nasrallah, if the Israelis get him, poor Naim Qassem, he's going to worry that maybe they will actually make him number 1, and then he'll be gone in a couple of weeks. So that I never ever.
And the chat says, come on, Luke, give us a hot take on Israel's response. Well, the longer that Israel goes without making a response, then I would suspect that Israel recognizes its vulnerability to more Iranian ballistic missile attacks. The more circumscribed Israel's response, right, the more Israel recognizes its vulnerability. On the other hand, it may well turn to escalation dominance and try to decapitate the Iranian regime, just as it's done to Hezbollah. And Israel may well be banking on regime change, that Iranians will be sick of their repressive Islamist regime and maybe try to overthrow it. How exactly that might happen, I don't know. I would expect that Israel will target its response to Israel's ballistic missile launches and Iran's ballistic missile program. If Israel goes after Iran's oil processing and exporting facilities, then I would expect Iran to launch attacks on Saudi Arabia and other Arab states' oil processing and exporting facilities, which would double the price of oil overnight and would very likely cost Kamala Harris a chance at the presidency. I would be particularly surprised. So I expect, number one, most likely attacks on Iranian missile launches. Next, most likely attacks on Iran's oil infrastructure. And least likely, direct attacks on Iran's nuclear facilities.
Saw coming. And so the question now, the open question is, can Hezbollah function as a really coherent and significant fighting force without the upper echelon? I think we're already seeing that the Israelis have neutralized one capability that I expected to be very formidable from Hezbollah, and that is the use of combined strike packages. That's drones, ballistic missiles, cruise missiles launched together simultaneously.
So about 90% of Iran's export earnings come from exporting oil. So it would be devastating to the Iranian economy to take that out, and it would be easy to take that out. So how would Iran fund its proxies if it can no longer export oil?
To overwhelm the censors of the Israelis. We haven't seen it. We haven't seen anything like that coming from. We saw the ballistic missile attack coming from Iran the other day, which was very significant. I'm sure we'll talk about that. Very significant, and it did overwhelm Israeli defenses to a certain extent. I thought that that was what we were going to see from Lebanon, where the reaction time for Israel would be much shorter. I thought we were going to see that in an incredibly high tempo.
So on the surface, on the face of things, right, Iran and its proxies have never seemed more vulnerable. So on the surface level of things, I can understand an Israeli temptation to try to deliver killer blows to its Iranian-backed enemies, right? Now's the time.
And we haven't seen it at all. So the Israelis took out the top leadership of Hezbollah, and they have neutralized that capability. So they have really set that organization back significantly. I'm not in a position to judge whether, how badly damaged, just how badly damaged it is, but it is clearly unbelievably badly damaged.
Yeah, so you would think it would be such a great thing. Israel is doing something that.
Oh, they're so uncomfortable. I wish I had thought of this before.
Right. So why isn't the Biden administration rejoicing in Israel's victories? Obviously, because the Biden administration does not see them as aligned with America's best interests.
Before we sat down, there was yesterday a Washington Post article, which I violated one of my rules on Twitter, and I highly recommended a Washington Post article to my followers on Twitter, because it is such a perfect window onto the mindset of the Biden administration. The article was a kind of history of the war. And an explanation that it is proved uncontrollable for Biden to control the war. Why? Because Benjamin Netanyahu was a very bad man. Did you know that? He's a very bad man, and he will not.
All right, let's hear just a little bit from this Washington Post article.
This news story was written by Karen DeYoung, and Missy top national security aides had a stern message to deliver to Israel as it prepared to launch a military operation in Gaza's southernmost city of Rafah. Its northern Gaza offensive against Hamas militants had already killed tens of thousands of Palestinian civilians.
Well, it turned out that Israel was right. Right, the Biden administration says that Israel would never be able to empty Rafah of civilians, and Israel did so within a couple of weeks. So almost all the Biden administration advice to Israel has been wrong. Biden didn't want Israel to invade Gaza. It didn't want Israel to take out Nasrallah. Didn't want Israel to widen the war with Hezbollah.
The same thing could not happen again. As Israeli Ambassador Michael Herzog arrived at the White House Situation Room to attend a virtual meeting that Jake Sullivan, Biden's national security advisor, and Secretary of State Antony Blinken were about to hold with their counterparts in Tel Aviv, the Israeli diplomat pulled Blinken aides aside with startling news. Less than an hour earlier, he said, Israeli warplanes had struck an office building in Damascus, targeting the Syrian headquarters of Iran's elite Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, a building next to the Iranian embassy. Later that same day, Herzog alerted the White House with news of yet another strike. Missiles from Israeli drones operating in Gaza had struck a clearly marked convoy of the Washington-based World Central Kitchen, one of the few organizations able to get supplies to starving civilians.
So if you're fighting for your survival, right, the welfare of the enemy civilians are not going to be of top concern. All right, Kip, we've turned off the video. Let's try it again.
I don't know where I lost you.
Okay, so you're making the case that my soul is trapped in matter, and you think there are better alternatives.
Yeah, did we talk about a mayfly?
Yes, you did the mayfly.
We did the mayfly bit, and you can see that they gotta really hone in on what's important because they only really have a day. You and I, we've had 50-something years or whatever. So I don't know. I just you having that comparative religion history, I would just ask you to like think on the Zohar and the Sufis and the Buddhists from the mystical perspective, and like what was going on with Paul when he had that road to that what happened to Paul on the road to Damascus, as far as you know. You paid any attention to that when you were younger?
Well, I did when I was younger because it was portrayed as a direct vision of the divine that Paul experienced. But why would my life be improved by a more mystical approach to life?
Because right now you're living under a misapprehension. It's a fundamental misapprehension. It's been getting worse and worse and worse, and it's basically maybe a crust that's covered up over the lens of your reality, and it does it to everybody. I mean, it's not necessarily your fault. It's kind of just the way things go. So when I say maybe trapped in matter, maybe I mean something along the lines of more of materialistic pursuits, even though, you know, I've never met you in person or anything, but I just know the way things go, that people don't even realize that this might be the only way to free will. They think they have free will, but then I feel like a lot of people they're at least I can speak for myself before, turned out that there was sort of a system of moment to moment self-gratification going on where I just kind of like pile up desires and mow them down like bowling pins. And, you know, it really doesn't matter. How important is it that Ohtani hit 54 home runs and stole 59 bases? You know, Michael Jordan suing his NASCAR. He's a NASCAR team owner. The running backs are going to become extinct in the NFL. Starting pitchers are going to become extinct in Major League Baseball. It's trivia. Most people are chasing trivia and desires.
Okay, and what would be more important to think about instead of those things?
I don't know. I mean, can I was really wanting to talk to you for like day before yesterday and again yesterday. And, you know, I might not have as good a with my words today, but can I play a little audio? No curse words or anything. Can I play a little audio from this guy, Pierre Grimes, that I told you had died a few months back?
Sure. Go ahead.
And Pierre, what he's doing is he's reading a book, and basically he's talking about Platonism and alchemy. But what he's reading in the book is he's trying to relate the mystical life, the mystical experiences, I guess, to maybe what you might call a layman. So let's give him about 4 or 5 minutes, and I'm going to make sure I have it on at least 1.25 because I know that's how you roll. Hold on.
Okay, bro.
Then he talks about why you're going to go through great anguish as you go searching for enlightenment, because the stone will be found that searches lies heavy on the searcher. It's difficult. I said, but the author is in fact of the opinion that the essential secret of this art towards enlightenment lies hidden in the human mind. Or put it in the modern terms, in the unconscious, says Carl Jung. Now, again, I'm going to quote from another alchemical work, not Carl Jung. Therefore, all those who desire to attain the blessings of this art should apply themselves to study, should gather the truth from the books, and not from invented fables and untruthful works. There is no way by which this art can truly be found except by completing their studies and understanding the words of the philosophers. Now, Jung.
Okay, Kip, let's stop it there and let's talk about it. So Okay, so he's saying that people should be contemplating the philosophers and put an end to trivial pursuits, but what he's talking about is something that's really only accessible to a tiny percentage of the population, and those with the capacity for abstract thought, meaning people with an IQ north of 115. And
don't you have that?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
So I just want to clarify that he's only talking about something that's only accessible to a minority of the population. But everything comes with trade-offs. So by spending more time in mystical and philosophical contemplation, right, you're spending less time on practical contemplation. And so what's the appropriate balance? Because I do see the case for mystical and philosophical contemplation, but I also see a significant case for practical contemplation. So what's the appropriate balance, and does it differ per person?
First of all, the world is in the dark as far as this kind of stuff goes. And I've tried to explain to you that like the Italians, how rich that culture was. I think they had forgotten how to make concrete. You know, they had fallen way far behind. And it was the way they got caught up is going and picking up a few fragments during the Crusades, and then picking up some more information from Muslim Spain, and then getting into some Syriac monasteries and getting things like just old information, and then like the Eastern Roman Empire, of course, had cleaved away from
Wait, Kip, you're not answering my question. So
Okay.
there are trade-offs. So what's the appropriate balance between mystical and philosophical contemplation on the one hand and practical, this worldly contemplation on the other hand? Because you couldn't be 100% just mystically contemplating, or you'd die, you'd just starve to death.
Maybe you would. I mean, maybe you would. But what I was trying to relate to you, I guess, in a circuitous manner, was that the West was totally dark as far as this goes.
Kip, answer my question. What's the appropriate balance?
What's the appropriate balance? I say throw off the worldly. All that worldly stuff. That's the appropriate balance. So throw that shit off. Like earlier when you're talking about Israel with Dooovid and stuff. Okay, I'm a little bit different in regard to thinking about that, because the darkness and the light, they are both in accord. What's going to happen is what's going to happen. You know what I mean? And so.
So you're preaching total indifference to this world, and as much as possible, just losing yourself in mystical contemplation, and it doesn't really matter what happens in the physical material world.
Is the Dallas Cowboys more important? You get
More
what I'm
important
saying?
than
I'm
what?
not hitting on you. I'm just using that as an example. I'm just saying, is that more important? You know, I live in Tennessee. Is the Tennessee Vols more important? I mean, like right now, it'd probably be important if I lived a little closer to the problem area to go help those people.
Yeah, I would say, I would say that allegiance to a sporting team for some people is more important than spending that time in philosophical, mystical contemplation, because it will connect you with other people. Spending your time in mystical and philosophical contemplation will isolate you from other people. So activities that connect you to other people are, for most people, most of the time, more aligned with their best interests than isolating yourself from other people.
So I guess ultimately it comes down to what the hell you think we're here for. You get what I'm saying? I'm trying to tell you there's a piece of Luke Ford that's celestial. And unfortunately, part of him is terrestrial. But who else but somebody like a Luke Ford could see and contemplate all the wonders? That could be why you're here. You get what I'm saying?
Right.
Otherwise,
you can make up any,
not going to do it.
You can make up any reason for why we're here. That there's no one answer. But you said, unfortunately, part of me is terrestrial. So, given that I am a physical being, a biological being in a terrestrial world, why is that unfortunate?
Oh, it's not unfortunate. It's not unfortunate because that would be, there's hundreds of billions of galaxies, and each galaxy has hundreds of billions of stars in it. And I'm sure one of those stars would probably trade off with you to go live through the roller coaster of emotions that you've been through on 58 years, because they just got this, they're just doing an orchestra the whole time. You get what I'm saying? But they're cool with that because they're Buddhists like that. But you get what I'm saying? At some point, and for you, this was about probably 15, 20 years ago, you were supposed to see through it. You were supposed to see through some of this ways that your senses have deluded you. And like I say, I'm not picking on you. I'm just saying my heart was heavy thinking about Luke, and it had more to do like with freeing your soul, and probably specifically because I see you get so invested in this Israel stuff, and I know you're not ethnically a Jew. So I'm like, well, is he a neocon? Is he just a Zionist? Whatever. He's doing everything but picking up the popcorn. I saw you getting all geeked up when that dude blew himself, got blown up with a pager or whatever. And I'm not harping at you for it.
No, I don't feel attacked. I don't see the strength. I don't see the strength of your argument in that almost all people who survive and reproduce have learned to join themselves to other people. That a life strategy of being alone is a terrible losing strategy for almost everyone. That we're evolved to live in a tribe, and so the alone solitude strategy that you endorse is just a terrible strategy for most people most of the time.
Well, they have. I mean, they have. That's why they have the what you might call the exoteric religions for the dumbasses, because on some level, this world is sort of like whether you want to call it a tax haven or whatever you want to call it, wage slaves or whatever. You could see the elite get everybody to do all their shit for them, right? So, like I'm saying, this has even in the Italian Renaissance, when they kind of bootstrapped themselves up and started towards what we would call the scientific revolution. Even 2 to 3 generations into that, they were doing the same shit as Babylon's, putting hex and incantations and magical shit on each other. But I'm trying to tell you, Luke, that there's a whole lot more going on in this universe than you realize. And in the same way that the force of things like these words that you hear on the news, and you dive in deep and take all this shit in, and I'm saying it has an effect on you. I've got
right. So let's say you're a parent with young kids. How much time should you spend in philosophical and mystical contemplation and check out from looking after your children? Because the more time that you, as a young parent, spend in philosophical and mystical contemplation, the less time you're spending providing and protecting for your children, and that will make their survival more difficult. So are you entitled to philosophical and mystical contemplation if it comes at the cost of other people's lives?
I'm not going to say it's not going to knock on your door before 40, because there's a different level that you can see that poets and people who write music, they can tap into that too. What you want to call it, the Tao, the force, whatever. But I'm saying your question specifically is not going to come up very often because it's something that you're going to be tapped on the shoulder with around the time of 40. You're not going to, and again, the whole thing is a cult. Again, if I had went through some secret handshake or some religious group or whatever, I'm not even supposed to be talking to you about this, but I know I'm talking to a fellow dude that's smart enough to come off of it. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah. So would you, Kip, would you be better off paying a little more attention to temporal concerns and getting yourself health insurance, or are you better off ignoring your own best interests and your own survival and spending your time in philosophical and mystical contemplation and doing without health insurance? Do you really think that mystical contemplation is a superior way to spend your time than getting health insurance?
I could get health insurance. I could go get $1 million worth of life insurance. I could go get my children $1 million worth of life insurance. I mean, I could do all those things that those people on television tell you should do. I could take my dogs to the vet twice a year and get them checkups. I could do all that stuff. But I've tried to tell you during our discussions over the past couple of months that not all of what you ingest is a con, but about 85% of it, you can see it. You feel me when it comes to the doctors and the dentists and the con jobs they're running. Not all the time, but most of the time. But I'm just trying to tell you the con's bigger than that. And the con is massive when it comes to you trying to decipher why it is that people can't see through Kamala Harris. Well, hell, there's been so many spells and incantations put against Donald Trump. That shit works on people. He's been poisoned by so many millions of people. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, the great thing about your worldview is that it cannot be challenged. It cannot be invalidated because it exists in a mystical realm. So the downside of that worldview is that you can skirt or challenge us because you just rely on mystical premises which essentially can't be invalidated. Now, I don't understand, why are you better off ignoring your responsibilities of providing for yourself health insurance and perhaps life insurance to take care of your children in the event of your unexpected demise? Why are you and the people who count on you better off by you ignoring these basic adult responsibilities?
Well, Luke, they know I've got 50 ounces of gold apiece for them already. They know I've got a house apiece for them. They know I'm not broke. I'm not even close to broke, but I'm not of that stuff. That's why, remember when I told you when I was finishing this house, I got taken advantage of by over $100,000?
Yes.
It's because I've left that shit behind. You get what I'm saying? So I'm at the mercy of people when it comes to that stuff, somewhat, especially in the world of like building a house, because I don't know that. I was always a symbol and a word manipulator. But I don't know, man. I'm telling you that a lot of these things that you think must be done, they're not that important. I mean, maybe it's probably good for me to have insurance, maybe. I don't know. But I know just technically, I think the way it works is, I don't know. You think the government will fine you if they find out you don't have insurance? How do you think that works? I can tell you what I've done in the past. Every once in a while, something will happen to me, and I will go to the county health department, and I will pay the people right there for the visit, and it's over and done with. And
right, you could lose everything you have through a health emergency, and you are not taking any provision for that. Right, you could lose your homes, you could lose everything if you had a health emergency and you have no health insurance. If you do get care for some kind of devastating health injury, it will be because society is picking up the bill, and society is going to bail you out. Right. So you're imposing you would be imposing a cost then on society because you haven't been willing to take what normal people would consider an adult responsibility.
Well, as you can realize by now, I've given myself over to something, right? And I will try to explain it to you this way. At night, a Buddha came to, just talking about one night, a Buddha sat under the tree and he came to illumination, okay? And the following morning, the rising sun in the east beheld him as a Buddha. And that Buddha, remember what I told you, nirvana means blown away. That Buddha was so blown away by what he had learned. It's not what I can teach you. All I can do is like point you a direction. But he was so blown away that he sat stunned for like a week. And during that time, a great storm threatened him and everybody around him. But the dark, evil serpent spirit, Muchalinda, wrapped its serpent tail all around him, and then put its serpent like a cobra hood over the top of him, and it protected him through that storm. Because one thing that I never really talked to you about this is there's an accord there. There's an accord between darkness, there's an accord between light, and they're going to take care of me. And that's better than any goddamn insurance company can do for me, okay? Now there's certain things you got to have. You need to have car insurance, right? I got to have that to stay legal. And I need to have homeowners insurance because I might already have these houses in my kid's name just in case something happens to me and I have a 6-figure bill like what you're talking about or whatever. But I have an insurance plan because I've given myself over to something, and it's a little bit different. You might not have come out smiling and laughing after having a damn full-grown deer run out into you on your motorcycle. But I'm telling you, I kind of feel like when my time's come. And there's not going to be any like $500,000 medical bills or whatever. So, maybe you're right. Maybe that is a wager I'm making or whatever. Man, I don't know everything, Luke. I'm just telling you that you have been, not you, everybody has been programmed by, you got to get your car insurance from Shaquille O'Neal, and you got to get your damn Gatorade from Lamar Jackson, and you got to make sure you trust Nick Saban in the world of homeowners insurance. I'm just telling you, a lot of that stuff is overkill. What do you think about that?
Well, I think you have a particular hero system just like everyone else, and you think that your hero system is superior to everybody else's hero system, just like I think my hero system is superior to everyone else's. And I don't know. I don't know on what basis one can assess hero systems, except perhaps on the basis of adaptability for the various challenges that life throws at you. So I have no doubt that there are certain challenges that life can throw at us for which your hero system is going to be superior. Yes, it will enable you to transcend all sorts of issues. And there are going to be other challenges that life may throw at us where my hero system is going to be a superior tool for getting through difficult times. And there will be other challenges where Jeffrey's hero system is going to be superior. So different hero systems have different adaptability for different situations. Now,
right.
As we go down through history, the hero systems that allow people best to adapt to reality and to propagate the species are going to tend to win out over hero systems that are less adaptable.
Right. When you're meditating over something like Israel, you ever ask yourself something like, they've been there, 75 years and can't seem to get along with the people around them? And then there's been 45,000 people killed, at least in the past year. And you think you got any solution there? You think how many people do they got to kill before there will be a happy neighborhood over there? What do you think, Luke?
Well, I don't think there will ever be a happy neighborhood in my lifetime. I can't imagine that. But I'm willing for Israel to do whatever it needs to do to survive. And I would hope that any other people is similarly willing to do whatever they need to do to survive. Are you willing for your people to do whatever it needs to do to survive, or would you be happy with your people getting flushed down the toilet of history?
I don't know. I mean, you'd have to define flush down the toilet of history. There's like 16 million Jews now. There was 16 million Jews last century. I mean, I don't think anybody's getting flushed down the toilet, but I wonder what you're getting out of that. I mean,
survival. I want my people to survive. And I have various identities, just like everyone else has various identities. But one of my identities is as an Orthodox Jew. And so I want Jews to live and survive. That's important to me. I want Israel to do whatever it needs to do to survive. I want the United States of America to do whatever it needs to do to survive. I want Australia to do whatever it needs to do to survive. And I would expect any other people in the world to have a commitment to their own survival.
Well, if you were the 115 IQ dude in the neighborhood, and you lived in a neighborhood that had apparently some 80 IQ guys, don't you think that's incumbent upon you to get along with those people? You're the one that's
not at the cost of my own survival. All right. So if Israel accommodates itself to its 85 IQ enemies, Israel will cease to survive and millions of Jews will die. So I am not so enraptured by getting along if that means millions of my people are going to die. Would you be cool with millions of your people dying just so that they could comfort themselves that they're getting along?
Well, probably not, but I also know Palestine wasn't the only place that was offered to the Jews. And I wonder if some of those other options they were offered, would they have a problem in that neighborhood too? You know?
I mean, yeah. Well, would you be happy living in Siberia?
Was that one of their offers, Siberia?
No, but why would you want to live somewhere other than what you've regarded as your home for thousands of years? If you have a chance of going home, why would you be okay with living elsewhere?
I don't know. I mean, you talk about their home. I noticed when I used to look at maps that were like maybe a couple of hundreds of years old, because I have some books from the 1800s. I noticed that Ashkenazi, lots of shit has named either Ashkenazi, Ashkenaz, all around Eastern Turkey. You ever notice that? Like near Armenia?
No, I haven't spent time thinking about that. I've been concentrating on Shohei Ohtani.
Yeah, dude. Yeah, I am kind of getting on you for that. I mean, that's something that I will give it to you, Luke. That is amazing because I played baseball, and you know, we lost Pete Rose too. So I'm gonna jump into the damn low level here, and we can talk about. I was the hugest Pete Rose fan. And I understand baseball, and I understand that 54-59 thing he did. It's never been done, and it's so doggone eerie the way he parallels the career of Babe Ruth 100 years ago. Are you aware of this?
Right. Babe Ruth started out as a pitcher, and I was listening to the commentary on last night's game between the Dodgers and the Padres, where one commentator said that Shohei's skills as a pitcher exceed his skills as a batter.
All right. No. Yeah. Babe Ruth, he wasn't just a pitcher. He was the best pitcher the Red Sox ever had. I mean, he was an awesome pitcher, but he played in an era to where like center field might be 450, 475 feet away. And like the right field line, the left field line might be like 280. So guys like he or Home Run Baker that had the most home runs, it might be 12, it might be 10. It was a totally different era, but he was dominant in that. And just like Ohtani or whatever, he made the switch over to be a hitter, I guess because they felt like they were wasting some of his talents. And at the same time, you know, they probably livened up the ball field. They livened up the balls and shortened some of the porches in the ball fields. I mean, and he hit 60 home runs. And Ohtani has done the same thing, I guess, after getting hurt. And if you look at Ohtani's pitching, it's elite. If he might not be the best of the best, but I bet he's one of the 5 best in baseball. And you can tell by his hitting, he's Barry Bonds. You know, he's Babe Ruth, Barry Bonds level on that too. And he's a Japanese dude, and he's a lanky 6'6" guy. So I don't know. I'm very impressed by them Japanese guys. If you remember that little Ichiro, he looks like he was about as big as a flea. But I'm telling you, there's something in the spirit of those Japanese people. They get it. You know what I mean? They get it. Unfortunately for them, they live in an era where we are going to dominate finances or whatever. So you can see that they've been in a financial stasis over there in Japan for about 30 or 35 years. But they are amazing people with amazing history, and they have an amazing, I guess you could say, the vestiges of their honor culture are still there, and they've faded away. You know, funny enough, the only thing left in America's honor culture can be found in the ghetto, in the hood, where they were a jogger. You might have to, you know, draw pistols or whatever if you step on the wrong guy's pair of shoes or whatever. But any kind of sense of honor is completely gone in America, except for certain parts of the hood. And it's the worst form of honor that they've kept to. But Japan's different. They seem to be more of an honorable people.
Do you participate in an organized religion?
No, sir. I was a devout atheist until I got tapped on the shoulder in 2007. So yeah.
Do you have any desire to find an organized religion?
No. Sometimes I feel a restlessness that I have a duty to maybe talk to people like the way I've talked to you. But there again, I used to hate pushy Christians. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I also feel like, I mean, when I'm thinking about Luke Ford, I feel like you've probably already been tapped on the shoulder because, you know, you're smart enough. I think you've probably been tapped on the shoulder 3 or 4 times. But I'm thinking your upbringing and everything you've been conditioned to believe is God or religion or whatever. The truth is so far out from that I feel like you might have been tapped on the shoulder a few times, but you didn't know. You know what I'm saying? You didn't know. You just thought maybe you chalked it up to I don't know. You just chalked it up to something else. Or it didn't make enough of an impression on you. But if you remember that movie, like Close Encounters of the Third Kind, you know what I mean? You remember that Richard Dreyfuss character in that movie?
Don't think I ever saw that movie.
Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Well, anyway, the Richard Dreyfuss character, he ends up getting some sort of a vision. And I think maybe other people got this same vision. And the vision was something about aliens coming. You know what I'm saying? And he was captured. He was captured by that vision to the point to where he was drawing, or he was recreating that vision in his living room. If I can remember correctly, like with dirt and stuff, you know, I think it was maybe called the Devil's Tower in South Dakota or somewhere out there, where he had gotten a vision of that mountain or something. And I think he had recreated it in his living room. And I was just going to tell you, if you had seen that movie, when you're captured by something like that, the Dallas Cowboys can't hold you anymore. Get what I'm saying? That kind of stuff, it's not enough anymore. It becomes more of those surrogate ways to pass the time, like Uncle Ted Kaczynski was talking about. You know, the Zohar, you know, the Zohar. I think that's where a lot of Kabbalah is in Judaism. You know, I think Zohar is actually, I think like if to you guys, you would call the book The Splendor. I think that might be what it means in Hebrew or whatever language it's written in. But I don't know, man. I just figured I would I would talk to you about some stuff like that. And like I say, we got to talk about Otani too. So maybe it wasn't a complete loss.
Okay, thanks, Kip. Good to catch up with you.
See you, bro. Bye-bye.
See you, bro. Bye-bye.
Not listen to the dictates of the Biden administration. And the article is a great. It's not great journalism in that it just takes dictation basically from the senior officials in the Biden administration and depicts their view of reality as reality. But it does us a great service in that it does that. As takers of dictation, they've done a really good job, and you get a little window onto how the senior Biden officials actually think about the world. They have a uniformed worldview, and that uniformed worldview has a couple of principles to it. One is the way to stabilize the Middle East is by reaching some kind of diplomatic accommodation with Tehran. They have never, ever, ever given this up. And Zainab, you know me well, so you know that that God put me on this earth to do one thing and one thing only, and that is to tell centrist Democrats that the Biden administration, the Obama administration, the whole Obama faction of the Democratic Party, which is now really the leadership of the Democratic Party, they are very proud of this idea. They're proud. They don't celebrate the pride they have in it because they know that people like you and me and at least half of America think it's crazy. But they are very proud of the idea that we can come to some kind of strategic accommodation with Iran. That's why they keep putting red lines on the Israelis of do not touch a hair on the chin of any Iranian. You cannot attack. Iran can attack anyone at once. Israel cannot attack Iran. That is the basic Biden doctrine, the Obama doctrine. They defined this conflict from day one as a Palestinian-Israeli conflict. It's not. It's objectively not. It is at least an Iranian-Israeli conflict. I actually believe it's an Iranian-American conflict, but the Biden administration refuses to see that. And so what they have done.
Okay, let's bring Claire Khaw back to the show. Claire, what's on your mind today?
The discussion you were having with Kip, I sort of thought it was something I was interested in, and then I really wasn't sure. It seems to be something to do with religion and politics. I just couldn't tell just by listening to him.
Well, no, he wasn't talking about religion and wasn't talking much about politics. He was talking about the lure of the mystical. So Kip is a big believer in mysticism.
Well, I've been having a few discussions with people who like mysticism, and I find them really annoying. I don't know if you agree with this. It seems that a lot of people just love their mumbo jumbo. The less they understand, the more they love it. They don't want a rationalist understanding of the universe. They want magic and lotions and potions. Is this your experience too?
Yeah. Well, people love to check out, and some people check out by watching pornography. Other people check out by watching sports or watching a lot of Netflix. Other people check out by overabsorption in the news. But I notice a lot of people just love to escape from reality, and some people do it through checking it out into mysticism or New Age spirituality or yoga or alcohol or drugs, but people often want to remove themselves from reality.
Well, obviously, I don't agree because I think it's only once you understand the universe through its basic principles, then you can start getting mystical, but not if you don't even have a coherent worldview about what it is you're supposed to do. I know that in Judaism you're not supposed to study the Zohar, the Kabbalah until you're 40, and having practicing for quite a few decades, practicing Judaism and understanding it in its basic terms. and anything else is basically mumbo jumbo.
Right. So you mentioned that people need to understand basic principles that run the universe. What are those basic principles?
Well, as I see it, Jewish theology is Jewish philosophy, and Jews are supposed to believe that God created good and evil. But a lot of people find that hard to accept because it's like, oh God, how could he create evil? I won't like him if he created evil. I don't know if that's your opinion or understanding.
Yeah, I believe that. I believe that God created good and evil, that God is the ultimate arbiter of morality. I believe that God created the Torah and transmitted it to Jews, and it provides a system for living.
Yeah, so if that is indeed the case, then what God expects of us is that we show in this life, which is but an examination hall, that we understand in theory and in practice the difference between good and evil. Obviously, it's not good enough that we understand what it is in theory, but we always choose the evil. We're supposed to pass the theory and practical part of the exam, and then we go to the better place, and that's the most basic understanding of the Abrahamic God.
So how superior do you think God-based ethics are for morally molding people compared to secular approaches to ethical behavior?
Well, obviously, if we believe in the Abrahamic God, we are, in fact, allowing the Abrahamic God to be the policeman in our mind. We invite him in, and he, polices our thoughts, and we feel bad if we think, bad thoughts, and that is the whole basis of it. So that we don't think that just because nobody is watching, we get away with it. We were supposed to think God is always watching.
Right, but my question was, how superior is that to secular sources of ethics? If you think that's far superior, on what basis?
Well, it's superior because it's totalitarian and totalizing. So if we believe that God is watching us all the time, then we're going to behave a lot better than when we think we can get away with it when nobody's watching.
Right, but did you see much real-world evidence for this? I understand that makes sense in theory, but what about in reality? So, for example, in my life experience, I do not see a large moral difference between the behavior of secular people and the behavior of religious people in the ethical realm when we're talking about people with similar levels of IQ.
I think the explanation for this is that most people are hypocrites. They only pretend to be Jews, Christians, and Muslims for the status, the moral status that it gives them, but actually they don't give a damn. But obviously, saying that you're Jewish, Christian, or Muslim dignifies you and protects you and gives you certain rights. But most people don't really believe, judging from their actions.
Okay, we've been over this ground many times. Yeah, I don't see much empirical real-world evidence that religious belief here and now.
But I'm saying that it doesn't exist. These people who claim to be Jews, Christians, and Muslims are really atheists, LARPing as Jews, Christians, and Muslims. And that is why they don't act on the logic of their beliefs. I'm sure we haven't discussed that before.
It's just an extension of No True Scotsman. No True Scotsman would do such a thing that if a religious Christian or a religious Jew or a religious Muslim acts in an unethical manner, then he's not a true Christian or a true Jew or a true Muslim. So it's not exactly a compelling line of argument.
No, I'm not saying that they're not. I'm just saying that no Jew, Christian, or Muslim says Jews, Christians, and Muslims are never do wrong. The fact is that rules are made to be broken, and I'm sure if God exists and made his commandments, he knew very well that people were bound to break them.
Okay, no true Scotsman, for people who are not aware, is an informal fallacy in which one attempts to protect an a posteriori claim from a falsifying counterexample by covertly modifying the initial claim. So rather than admitting error or providing evidence that would disqualify the falsifying counterexample, claim is modified into an a priori claim to definitionally exclude the undesirable counterexample. So the modification is signaled by the use of rhetoric such as true, pure, genuine, authentic, or real. So it's an ad hoc rescue of a refuted generalization. So person A might say, no Scotsman puts sugar on his porridge. Person B, but my Uncle Angus is a Scotsman, he puts sugar on his porridge. Person A, no true Scotsman puts sugar on his porridge. So you just add the modifier true. So it's
I would use righteous as the word, because I fully accept that no Jew, Christian, or Muslim will ever say, "Oh, Jews are never murderers, rapists, robbers, etc." Because I think they already know that there will be some who will be criminals. So the word to distinguish the the righteous would be, those who follow the principles of their religious system is to say, that here's a principled, observant Jew who never breaks the Sabbath, etc., etc., and here's, there's just that person over there is only a cultural Muslim. His parents may be Muslim, but he drinks and he goes to the casino and he eats pork. It's that kind of classification.
Right. So by definition, if you say no righteous Jew acts unrighteously, you're adding the modifier righteous. So by definition, to be righteous, you can't be someone who's frequently engaged in unrighteous behavior. Now, I do think in some places, there is a substantial moral difference between religious people and secular people. It's just in United States today, I don't see a dramatic difference. But I'm sure in some times, in some places, in some circumstances, that religiosity will substantially morally improve people. I see some people become dramatically improved by adopting religion, but then I see other people adopting religion and it doesn't seem to make them any finer. Some people seem to be improved and become a lot nicer and more productive by leaving religion. So right now, the directions are just all over the map. I can't see any consistent direction between becoming more religious and more ethical. But in certain times and places, I'm sure there is that kind of correlation.
Well, I think that the problem is that most people are hypocrites. I mean, that is the easiest explanation for the bad behavior that we see.
Well, to be hypocritical, you have to believe in things greater than yourself. So really only religious people can be hypocritical. If you don't believe in any moral code greater than yourself, it's hard to be hypocritical.
Yeah, you have to pretend to believe, and then, and you are measured by the people around you who are part of the same moral system, saying, "Oh, but you broke the Sabbath, you drank alcohol, you ate pork, you ate shellfish," and this can only be policed by members of your religious group.
Okay, Claire, I'm going to move on. So if you want to make further points, put them in the chat, and I might bring you back if I want to explore any of those points in greater depth. Back to Michael Doran, investigating this Washington Post article on the Biden administration and Bibi Netanyahu.
With this, by restricting the Israelis in this way, they have actually enhanced the advantages that Iran has in the conflict. And its advantages are these disruptive military capabilities that we're talking about, the drones, ballistic missiles, and cruise missiles. That is the big muscle that Iran has. It has enormous vulnerabilities. It has no air force to speak of. Its air force is a 1960s air force. Yeah. Its land forces, its tanks are 1970s tanks, maybe a few 1980s Soviet tanks. They can't stand up to any kind of serious 21st century enemy. So it's enormously vulnerable. It has a very narrow base of support domestically in Iran, but it has this dome, this shield of immunity that the Biden policy has put over Iran proper, and the Biden administration has tried to restrict Israel at every step of the way because it's negotiating over the heads of the Israelis with Tehran, saying, okay, if you'll moderate your proxies, we'll hold back the Israelis and we'll get a negotiated settlement. We'll get a ceasefire. And so what has happened is that the Israelis, as a result of this, is that Israeli deterrence has been eroded and diminished by its great supporter, the United States. And but the Biden administration can't think itself out. It's in a maze.
So I haven't spent much time over the years. I've been live streaming almost every day since 2018. I haven't spent much time arguing whether or not the Trump administration had a better approach to Iran, or was it the Biden administration with its nuclear deal with Iran that was passed in 2015, or has the Biden administration a superior or inferior way of negotiating with Iran? I haven't had any strong opinions on that. I find Michael Doran's analysis there interesting. So I also respect the analysis of John Mearsheimer, and he said that the Obama administration reached the best deal possible with Iran in 2015. Here are some more excerpts from the Washington Post article that Mike Doran was referencing.
People were dead, including aid workers from the United States, Britain, Poland, and Australia, along with their Palestinian driver. It was a terrible mistake, a tragedy.
So have there been any wars where civilians haven't died, where there haven't been mistaken killings of innocent people? Not that I'm aware.
Herzog said. Israel, he vowed, would investigate and hold those responsible to account. In a statement, an outraged U.S. president said that despite months of urging, Israel has not done enough to protect aid workers and civilians from its attacks in Gaza. 6 months into the war, the events of that day encapsulated for Biden the dual.
So which nations have engaged in urban warfare in any similar fashion to what Israel is faced with in destroying Hamas, and done it with much less loss of life of civilians? All right, I don't know anyone who has done it more effectively, more efficiently, with fewer innocent lives lost.
Challenges he has faced since the conflict began with Hamas's murderous October 7th incursion into Israel that left about 1,200 people dead and 250 taken hostage. While personally committed to supporting Israel's goal of obliterating Hamas, Biden had repeatedly stressed to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu the need to adhere to international norms requiring protection of civilians and provision of humanitarian aid, guidelines that Israel had just as often shown itself unable or unwilling to follow.
So who's done it better in similar circumstances? Right? If other nations engaged in urban warfare have consistently done this better, why isn't this ever cited? Right? Against some standard of perfection, Israel falls short. Against a standard of perfection, the United States falls short. Against the standard of perfection, every nation state falls short. So if other nations have engaged in urban warfare, anything like the task confronting Israel, who's done it better? This never gets cited. Why does it never get cited? Because there aren't other examples of other nations doing this in a more effective and efficient manner.
Biden's overriding concern was preventing an all-out conflagration in the region. Yet, as he sought a path for long-term peace and stability for Israel, Biden was undermined at every turn by Netanyahu's conduct of the Gaza war, his refusal to consider establishment of a...
It just reminds me, a lot of bosses feel themselves undermined at every turn by many of their employees. I'm sure a lot of employees feel constantly undermined by their bosses. It's incredibly easy to feel victimized. Is there any person that never feels victimized? Right? To be human is to feel victimized, because as soon as you enter into any sort of relationship with other people, their behavior will inevitably depart at times from the type of behavior that you would want and that you expect. And so when other people's behavior departs from what we expect, what we believe we're going to get, right, then we feel betrayed. So you cannot form any kind of relationship without inevitably feeling betrayed.
Palestinian state and the territorial ambitions of his right-wing government in the occupied territories. Lebanon-based Hezbollah, a far more formidable foe than Hamas, had already joined the fight, along with other Iranian-backed groups in Iraq, Syria.
So I've linked this Washington Post article if you want to read it. Let's have a look at Mike Doran's Twitter feed. So he notes chief of the Iranian Quds Force, apparently dead in a Hezbollah bunker in Beirut. So he was the successor to Qasem Soleimani, who was assassinated by Donald Trump. He ran Iran's terror empire. So his elimination would mark another astonishing achievement by the IDF. Washington Post on Operation Grim Reaper. Right, the Mossad began smuggling booby-trap radios into Lebanon in 2015. Large batteries of the radios contained explosives and a system to monitor communications. Israel eavesdropped on Hezbollah's communications for 9 years, all the while preserving the option of turning pages into bombs. So how likely would you be to want to side with Hezbollah and confide in Hezbollah, knowing how recklessly compromised their communications are? And you got to imagine that Iran's communications are similarly compromised. So would you want to be making deals with Iran given how compromised it is? Elon Musk endorses President Trump. Trump must win to preserve the Constitution and democracy in America, Musk said from the stage. His T-shirt has Occupies Mars on it. Trump promised to go to Mars if he wins. And more from Mike Doran. The man in charge, President Obama. I think Obama's too lazy to be in charge. President Obama will join campaign events of his chosen candidate, Kamala Harris, starting October 10. His speeches in support of her, which will continue until the election, will be delivered in swing states, starting with Pennsylvania. The aftermath of Israel's airstrikes on Beirut in the airport area, Hezbollah and Iran managed to turn southern Beirut into Gaza. Another stunning victory for the axis of resistance. So it all depends on your perspective. You could blame Israel for this destruction. You could blame Iran. You could blame Hezbollah. Depends on your hero system. Between Saturday night, Sunday morning, Israel launched missile strikes against Hezbollah targets in the southern suburbs of Beirut. The strikes followed one another for about half an hour. The conflict, properly understood, is Israel versus Iran. Whose side are you on? This is Bibi Netanyahu.
I have a message. I have a message for President Macron. Today, Israel is defending itself on 7 fronts against the enemies of civilization. We're fighting in Gaza against Hamas, those savages who murdered, raped, beheaded, and burned our people on October 7th. We're fighting in Lebanon against Hezbollah, the most heavily armed terror organization in the world, which was planned.
I'm struck by the visceral nature of Israeli responses to threats of embargo. I mean, it makes Israelis furious. So BDS, boycott, divest, sanction, right, also attracts a visceral response from Israel.
Planning an even greater massacre than October 7th on our northern border, and that has rocketed Israeli towns and cities for nearly a year. We're fighting against the Houthis in Yemen and the Shiite militias in Iraq and Syria that together have launched hundreds of drones and missile attacks against Israel. We're fighting against terrorists in Judea and Samaria who are trying to murder civilians in the heart of our cities. And we're fighting against Iran, which last week fired over 200 ballistic missiles directly at Israel, and which stands behind the 7-front war against Israel. As Israel fights the forces of barbarism led by Iran, all civilized countries should be standing firmly by Israel's side. Yet President Macron and some other Western leaders are now calling for an arms embargo against Israel. Shame on them.
I think most people will side with whoever's more aligned with their best interests. So who's more vulnerable right now? Which regime is more likely to last? The Jewish state of Israel or the Islamic Republic of Iran? Israeli animators launched another scary video at Iran. I don't think it is nearly as scary as the Hezbollah and Iran videos on which John Mearsheimer is basing his analyses. In the scary video contest, Israel is losing. Listening to Glenn Greenwald and John Mearsheimer explain how hopeless Israel's situation is and how Hezbollah is about to deal Israel a horrible blow reminds me of the Black Knight in Monty Python and the Holy Grail. The Black Knight, after having his arm cut off by King Arthur, claims that his injury is but a scratch. He then has his other arm and legs cut off and says, let's call it a draw. Come back and I'll bite your legs off. The analysis of Glenn Greenwald and John Mearsheimer is full of holes. One example, John Mearsheimer says decapitation doesn't work, but he admits that Hezbollah has not fired off ballistic missiles, drones, and cruise missiles, and it hasn't done so. I would add, in the mixed strike packages that we predicted just a few weeks ago, we thought these capabilities would defy Israel's defenses and leave vulnerable all Israeli critical national infrastructure. Thwarting those attacks is a huge achievement, and decapitation is a big reason for it. Another example, Glenn and John decry the absence of Israeli reporting and insinuate from this that there's a cover-up going on. The IDF is experiencing great hardship in Lebanon. Neither one of them shows awareness of the fact that this is Rosh Hashanah. So you had 2 days of the Rosh Hashanah holiday in Israel and then the Sabbath. So essentially, many Israelis were observing these days, and therefore Israeli papers were not publishing, and the news media was on skeleton crews. Israel's doing great, according to Mike Doran. Hezbollah has been severely weakened. Israel has changed the trajectory, and the war is reshaping the entire game. Does Hezbollah still have the ability to fire off rockets? Yes. Will the fighting be hard in southern Lebanon? Yes. But the entire war in Lebanon has turned in Israel's favor dramatically. Iran has all but lost its Lebanese shield, which was the most important component of its regional axis. Like the Black Knight, Hezbollah forever talks smack, but it can't make good on its most serious threats. Greenwald and Misham are broken records, weirdly out of touch with reality. And Mike Doran praising Bibi Netanyahu for his stunning successes. The Israeli army admitted that Iranian missiles hit 2 air bases, but said aircraft and air force capabilities were not damaged. The IDF is sealing tunnels that Hezbollah dug on Israel's border with concrete. The Obama-Biden team never explained this appeasement of Iran. Kamala Harris needs to answer the following question today. It says, former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, is her administration going to allow $6 billion to go to the regime in the Islamic Republic of Iran while it is holding Americans hostage in Gaza, while it is firing missiles at U.S. ships in the Red Sea? This is appeasement that will end badly for Israel and America and our Gulf friends. So I don't have a strong opinion on which side is correct here. U.S. Deputy Secretary of State said that the security architecture created by Russia and Iran is undesirable for countries in the southern Caucasus. Future built around the axis of Russia and Iran as the main players in the South Caucasus. Security is unstable and undesirable, including for the governments of Armenia and Azerbaijan. Caroline Glick says, it would be nice if the U.S. stopped using every Jewish religious holiday when official Israel is offline to leak and to subvert Israel's operational plans and to try to force Israel into deals with its enemies that endanger its existence and squander its hard-won victories. Mike Doran says, Israel may strike Iran on the anniversary of the October 7 massacre. Mike says, I grew up in a democracy. It wasn't perfect, but I remember it fondly. Iran honors the memory of Ismail Haniyeh, Qasem Soleimani, and the Marshmallow Mullah Hassan Nasrallah by publishing clips of Ayatollah Khomeini showering sweet kisses upon them. In its first volley against Iran after the October 1 ballistic missile barrage, Israel launched a scary cartoon, coming soon, a missile attack from submarines. Let the debates begin. Whose cartoons are scarier, Hezbollah's, Iran's, or Israel's? Al Jazeera joins the chorus. Since Friday, Hezbollah has lost contact with the head of the organization's executive council, Hashem Zafi al-Din. The IDF called the mayor of Touria in the Baalbek area, asked the residents of the city to evacuate. This is a Hezbollah stronghold. Syria has submitted an application to join BRICS. Good. I want everyone to join BRICS so it becomes as effective as the Model UN. Iranian oil tankers have fled to international waters out of fear of an Israeli attack on Iran's largest oil terminal. Israeli officials have threatened such a response to Iran's latest massive strike. Satellite images show that just a few days ago, a large number of tankers were anchored off Khaw Island, known as the Oil Island. About 90% of Iran's oil exports pass through this strategically important hub. But on Friday, October 4, the port was suddenly empty. New Hezbollah chief Hashem Zafi al-Din apparently killed in an Israeli strike. Israel has given no assurances it won't target Iran's nuclear facilities. Mike Doran says U.S. policy is consistently emboldening Iran. Hamas has announced another one of its leaders was killed in a drone attack in the city of Tripoli. This is the farthest north in Lebanon that Israel has attacked, and it's in a Sunni, not a Shiite area. So Hezbollah is overwhelmingly a Shia operation. The commander of the Quds force, General Ismail Khani, may have been injured. possibly killed. And the United States Biden regime will not see a decision by Iran to acquire a nuclear weapon until minutes before a nuclear-tipped missile is launched on Tel Aviv. When the Obama-Biden team finally acknowledge the danger, they will use it to justify a demand for Israeli restraint and de-escalation. To everything, there is an end, including to thuggish mullahs. So a new Hezbollah leader apparently killed in an Israeli airstrike. Lebanese are citizens in a democracy. Like I'm the coach of the Italian national soccer team. I am free to voice opinions about the team. I can bark orders at the players. I just can't influence what they actually do. Iran built an enemy in Lebanon and took that country to war. What say did the elected Lebanese leaders have in either of these developments? The Lebanese government does not have sovereignty over its own territory.
Of all of these principles that it has, we can't have policies that will strengthen the right wing in Israel. We can't allow the Israelis to expand the conflict in Lebanon because that won't let us get a ceasefire in Gaza and so on. And they're in this maze. They can't get out. They can't think themselves out of it. They don't realize that they have undermined the deterrence of their ally, and they don't realize that the real problem in the Middle East is Iran and Iranian power. And the solution, the way to stabilize the Middle East is to deter.
Okay, question in the chat. Why would I want anything similar to the UN to exist? The UN doesn't have much power, so I don't spend much time analyzing the UN. I don't spend much time thinking about the UN. I don't have strong feelings about the UN. I think there are many things that the UN does that are net positive. And there are some things the UN does that negative, but overall UN doesn't have significant power. So I don't really sweat what's going on with the UN. Is Bibi a Rambo for his people? I don't know. I don't know if Israel is pursuing a good strategy or not.
Iran.
Yeah, and you can see that when they've promoted the Lebanon-Israel maritime that Israel is still on a defensive mode when it comes to getting all the attacks of
the Israelis. There's no such thing as attempt to win, right? Don't counterattack. As you mentioned, the Israelis saw the Iranians putting the missiles on their launchers, and they wanted to preempt, and the Biden administration said no. And then after Iran hit Israel, they said, take the win, right? Don't counterattack. I mean, in legal terms, the Biden administration's policy, if we were to turn this into legalese, it's as if they're saying to the Israelis, there's no such thing as attempted murder. There's no such thing as assault with a deadly weapon.
So I'm playing these lengthy excerpts from Mike Doran because it's different from the previous analysis that I have frequently played on this channel. And I think he may be right.
Time you're allowed, they have this mantra they say over and over, which is that Israel has a right to defend itself. But the only time they're allowed to attack is if they've actually been mortally wounded. So it's like in legal terms they're saying, if you get murdered, then you can come to me and we'll talk about doing something about the guy who's trying to murder you. But attempted murder, that doesn't count as a reason to do anything. Assault with a deadly weapon, that doesn't count as anything that you can do. So the Israelis recognized as of April 13th.
What are the chances that Israel can return its citizens to the north of Israel and that Israel can significantly reduce Hezbollah's capability, just like it reduced the capability of Hamas? I want to see indices that show us whether Israel is winning or losing with its current strategy. All right, I'm wide open to the arguments that Israel's winning. I'm wide open to the arguments that Israel's in an impossible situation. I'm wide open to any arguments on this. So if Israel's able to retain its citizens, right, if you're of its best and brightest move overseas because they believe that Israel's on a winning strategy, then that would be a great sign for the current strategy. But if many of Israel's brightest and most productive citizens keep moving overseas, then that would be a bad sign for the strategy.
13-14, which is when that first barrage. They understood that they really understood, that was a low point for them in the war, that their deterrence against Iran had been significantly eroded. This was the largest, at that time, it was the largest ballistic missile attack that one country had ever launched against another. So the Americans were saying this is something that is acceptable to attack Israel like this. The Israelis want to send this message to the entire world that no, this is not acceptable. The capabilities that the Iranians showcased on October 1 were significant. They penetrated the Israeli defenses. They hit the Nevatim air base some 20 or 30 times. They didn't do any significant damage, but they did hit it. And that Nevatim air base is where the F-35s are. So this is a significant capability they showed. If they were to send.
What are the chances that Israel can encourage regime change in Iran? I mean, on the one hand, it seems like a pipe dream. On the other hand, that would single-handedly solve a substantial number of the Middle East problems.
And 100 or 200 ballistic missiles at Israel's Dimona nuclear reactor, or at some significant critical national infrastructure, they could probably overwhelm the system and do real damage. They could, of course, kill lots of civilians with these. These are ballistic missiles that carry very large warheads. There are also ballistic missiles that could carry nuclear warheads. And Iran, if it went hell for leather, could develop a nuclear weapon, say 10 nuclear devices in a year. I think this is where the experts are now. Ali Hainonen, former deputy head of the IAEA, recently said they could have 10 weapons, 10 devices in a year's time. They could put, if they sent a barrage like this with 100, 200 ballistic missiles, and they maybe had 5 of them had nuclear-tipped warheads, nuclear-tipped missiles, the Israelis would not be able to identify which are nuclear, which are non-nuclear. They have exactly the same appearance and trajectory and so on. And so Iran could deal a very devastating blow to Israel. Israel cannot allow this. It cannot allow this. So it has to take something from Iran that Iran holds dear now to reestablish deterrence, escalation, dominance. The problem they have is the Americans are restricting, as you say. President Biden is saying, has to be proportional. Don't hit nuclear sites. And they're also saying, I think, don't hit critical national infrastructure, like especially the oil exporting capabilities or the refining capabilities. So where does that leave the Israelis? They've got basically 4 choices. One is military sites. The other is nuclear sites. The third is critical national infrastructure, the oil refining and export capabilities. And finally, the least likely but the most interesting to kind of speculate about is decapitation. I wouldn't have thought about this. I wouldn't have even put that on the list just a month or 2 ago. But after seeing what they've done to Hezbollah, you wonder, maybe they're as prepared for this conflict as they were for the Hezbollah conflict. Maybe they have some rabbits to pull out of their hat. I don't know. But with the
It's funny. I was watching something on Al Arabiya, and
so most people have a natural inclination to go with the strong horse, particularly the Arab world, and Israel certainly appears the stronger horse right now.
And now even the proxies are apparently afraid. I mean, this is what is said, that Iran.
Right. If your communications are vulnerable and Israel is tapping into the communications amongst members of Hezbollah and the Iranian regime, right, that would significantly deter other forces and other countries from throwing in their lot with Hezbollah and Iran.
Iran is losing its appeal as the sponsor of all these jihadi groups. They are now left alone
because they realize they're alone on the. They realize that Iran was using them to protect Iran,
exactly,
not to help them.
Yes. So I think it is damaging really their.
Is there any other time in the last 20 years where Iran's stock has been so low, where Hezbollah's status has been so low? where Iran and Hezbollah have appeared so vulnerable. I can't think of any other time.
Reputation, especially that now Al-Shabaab is looking into a greater partnership with Houthis because they want to, apparently they want to open a front in the Indian Ocean. So now I guess even Al-Shabaab are questioning their...
Is this the winning? You know, when you talk to Middle Easterners, they can't understand the stupidity of a fully modern and sophisticated American mind, right? The best educated, the brightest...
Right. Many of our best educated and brightest people have an instinctive revulsion against the achievements of European civilization, and they automatically side with those who are of darker skin, carrying on conflicts with the West.
People in America have really silly ideas about the world, and they can't understand that, so they start going to conspiracy theories, and they think, yeah. But when you look at the tailwind that the Biden administration's policy has given to Iran over the last 4 years, it's really amazing. So all over the region, these guys looked like they were unstoppable. And now they come up against a real military power, Israel, which has decided that, okay, the United States is not going to do this. It's not going to define as its job to weaken the resistance axis. So we have to do it ourselves. That's basically what's happened, and they're doing it. And lo and behold, they show the incredible vulnerabilities that Iran has. I don't want to minimize it, because Iran has very serious capabilities. These rockets, drones, ballistic missiles. This is a consequence of 20 or 30 years of progressive education and our higher education. That's the number one thing. God put me on this earth for another reason. There are two reasons. One is to tell everyone that the Biden administration really does have these stupid ideas about stabilizing the Middle East with Iran, and that they're proud of it. And the other one is don't accept the explanation that the cause of the anti-Semitism on our campuses is because of the Arab and Muslim students.
So what unites the eclectic left-wing point of view, right? It's united by a desire to demystify and decode, right, the traditional worldview, right? So left eclecticism, that's Ronnie Goodman in his book, The Conservative Claims of Cultural Oppression, right? It has a unity around the Marxist perspective, that you can use Marxist analytics and theories to deconstruct and demystify traditional sources of authority. So they set themselves against repressive Western institutions and practices, right? They investigate a painting or a novel or a piece of architecture, and their aim is not primarily to show the work's character or governing idea. The goal is rather to subdue the work through aggressive demystification, right? By positing its socio-economic determinants, its ideological implications, by scanning it for any signs of subversion, and then judging the result against an ideal of total freedom. So much of the extreme left and extreme right analysis and criticism of the West and of the United States is judging the West and judging the United States against an ideal of total freedom. On the other hand, you have right-wing eclecticism, which is characterized by all sorts of sharp internal disagreements, but there is a certain unity of purpose, and that is to subdue liberalism through aggressive demystification, right? Right eclecticism does not seek to refute liberalism as a set of ideas, but rather to expose liberalism's self-understanding as fraudulent, to reveal the partisan nature of this hero system that claims to transcend hero systems, to reveal that the various existential, epistemic, and ideological motives that liberals impute to conservatives are just the hidden rot lying at the core of liberal virtue. It is liberals, not conservatives, who need order, closure, and structure. It's liberals, not conservatives, who pursue group dominance and endorse inequality. So if conservatives are to discredit conservaphobia, they must first discredit those from whom it issues, the liberal elites, and that's what the critical theory of the right endeavors to do. So you'll find many similar arguments on the right against liberalism that are similar to anti-colonial arguments, right? Both anti-colonial arguments and many right-wing arguments will charge that liberalism is an aggression. It is a form of paternalistic colonialism. It's part of our reflexive aversion to anything that is not liberal. The liberals treat American traditionalists with the same deference. No, they don't treat American traditionalists with the same deference that they extend to citizens of the developing world. So what is the rational basis for liberalism denying American traditionalists, right, the respect that they accord to traditionalists, say, in the Middle East or in Africa?
Or the Islamists, or the Qatari funding, or so on and so forth. Not to say that these things don't have some kind of a role somewhere, but this is a the number one problem. This is a homegrown problem. American progressivism, which is taught and imbibed by people who are many generations in the United States and are not taking money from foreigners. It teaches that Israel is a colonial settler state, that it is supported by the worst elements in the United States, which are basically people who are the heirs to the colonial settler legacy of the West, and that if we want to overthrow this colonial settler ruling elite in the United States, then we have to oppose Israel. This is how they see the world.
Right. This is the dominant thinking in our institutions. This is the dominant thinking in academia. This is dominant thinking at the UN. This is the dominant thinking in the world of human rights and international humanitarian law.
The fight is really not simply a fight about Middle East policy. It's a fight about the role of progressivism in our educational system and among our educated elite.
So you really see it also as a national security issue, given
100%, because it leads to this labyrinth. Again, I take you back to the Washington Post article, which
everyone should read it.
Everyone should read it because it shows you the tremendous limitations of their ability to think themselves out of this problem. Because there's a complete overlap between their domestic political agenda, which is to defeat evangelical Christians, security-minded Republicans, Zionist Jews. These are all these people, all the people in the United States who instinctively support Israel and see Israel as a sister. I don't know which close relative of the United States. All the people who see the Israel that way are by nature enemies of progressivism in the American domestic.
Right, progressivism loathes ethnicity as a basis for national identity.
Context. So they have created a vision of the Middle East that says the people that you.
Let me rephrase that. They loathe ethnicity among people of European heritage as a basis for a national state.
Oh dear progressives, the people that you hate in domestic American politics anyway, they are the cause of war in the Middle East. Netanyahu and his American supporters, that's the cause of war. The way to peace it's not that the Iranians are the party of peace. Netanyahu and his supporters, that's the war party. The Iranians are not the peace party, but they are the objects of diplomacy, and diplomacy toward Iran is the way to stabilize the region. According to them, Israel. This is really a very old idea that has been repackaged in progressivism, and the old idea is that Israel is acting as a catapult that is throwing us into wars for it. We have the way I see it is that Israel is the answer to our problem in the Middle East, not the problem. So,
right, here is an expert on Iran reveals scenarios for an Israel-Iran war.
So there are four types of targets, I think, generally that Israel can go after them through military strikes. First is the nuclear sites. One thing that we should know is that right now that the regime knows its missile program really does not provide any deterrence, I think it is more eager to go after the nuclear bomb. It doesn't matter what they say in the short term. In the short term, maybe they say, okay, let's negotiate, because they are in a very big position now. But after what we saw, after everyone knows how weak the regime is now, they need that bomb. Their whole missile program is worth nothing if they don't have the bomb. So they will go after the bomb. So that means Israel also is more eager, given that the regime wants to destroy Israel, to get rid of their nuclear program. So one target is the nuclear facilities.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this very special edition of Through.
There are 4 types of targets, I think, generally that Israel can go after them through military strikes. There are like other cyber things that, Israel has a much wider options. But if we just focus on the military part, so first is the nuclear sites. So one thing that we should know is that right now that the regime knows its missile program really does not provide any deterrence, I think it is more eager to go after the nuclear bomb. It doesn't matter what they say in the short term. In the short term, maybe they say, okay, let's negotiate, because they are in a very big position now. But after what we saw, after everyone knows how weak the regime is now, they need that bomb. Their whole missile program is worse.
All right, so key question. Who's the most vulnerable right now? Is it Israel or is it Iran?
It's nothing if they don't have the bomb. So they will go after the bomb. So that means Israel also is more eager, given that the regime wants to destroy Israel, to get rid of their nuclear program. So one target is the nuclear facilities. That's a very complex subject in terms of political consequences, in terms of environmental consequences, and in terms of feasibility. Because if you talk to military experts, they are not sure that Israel, as it is, with the capacity that it has now, can actually, destroy the nuclear program or not. And by destroy, I don't mean that the regime cannot rebuild it, but setting it back for a few years. So that's what we always talk about, because the regime has the expertise, has the technology, and this is a very old technology, it's not a very sophisticated thing. So that's one option. The second option is the military infrastructure of the regime. So this includes IRGC headquarters, IRGC sites, the missile production and storage, the weapon production and storage, the defense ministry, things like that, and their officials, like top IRGC officials, top defense ministry officials. Israel can go after them. The third option is the political target, like the Supreme Leader's office, Supreme Leader himself, Presidential Palace, the Ministry of Intelligence and Security, which is partially responsible for all this terrorism around the borders and Israel, the Majlis. So these are political targets that Israel can go after. And then the fourth one is the industrial infrastructure, like the oil and gas production, refineries, transfer facilities, the petrochemical plants, the industrial metal production facilities. So if you go after these.
Okay, here is Eric Kaufmann talking about settler colonialism and the drivers of anti-Israel sentiment. He is talking with author Adam Kirsch.
Come to this topic. How did you come to write this book?
Sure. Thanks, Eric, for doing this conversation. I'm glad to be here talking with you. The book, which is a short book, I wrote it, started thinking about writing it after the Hamas attack last October 7th, particularly when I saw how the attack, which killed over 1,200 Israelis, mostly civilians, was being welcomed and received quite positively in some parts of American academia and in progressive circles. And there were a number of statements that organizations and individuals made right after the news of the attacks arrived, embracing them. And most of those statements used the term settler colonial or settler colonialism in some way. And I had been familiar with the idea of settler colonialism as an academic theory. It's something that has become pretty prominent in the humanities over the last 10 or 15 years. But it seemed to me that when people were saying the Hamas attack was resistance to settler colonialism, or that all Israelis are legitimate targets because they're all settlers, that this academic theory had sort of passed over into real world politics, and it was starting to affect the way people thought about Israel-Palestine, especially young people, and also about the history of this country, of the United States, because as I get into in the book, settler colonialism is an idea that was really first developed to talk about countries like the U.S.
Right. So every place is settled by people who moved there, because nobody just emerged straight out of the ground. Right. So there's never been a nation state that is not developed through, usually without some degree of ethnic cleansing. And the people who are displaced by the arrival of Europeans, right, they weren't necessarily living in great peace with other peoples and the environment. So the arc of history means that human desires are infinite and natural resources are limited. So groups are in frequent conflict with one another over land and other natural resources.
And Australia and Canada, and then became applied to Israel.
And really, in just thinking about, there have been quite a number of books now trying to probe, including my own, trying to probe different aspects of what we might call progressive illiberalism or woke or whatever. And I'm just wondering sort of how you see this book's core argument and where it fits into these critiques more broadly of the culture.
Right. So one way of summarizing this type of argument is that anything that white people do is bad, except to the extent that they defer to the interests of people who have darker skin than they do. So when your group is more effective, more efficient, has better tools, is of higher intelligence and more cohesive, right, you will inevitably outcompete other groups. And so even if you don't take over land occupied by other groups, you will dominate economies and you will exercise, say, cultural imperialism, right? So the fit and the efficient and the effective invariably outcompete those who are less fit, less efficient, and less effective. And you can decry this as a bad thing, but it's the nature of reality. And so much of the resentment against groups who are successful is resentment that they've managed to achieve greater things and outcompete those who are less successful. And Europeans in particular have come to dominate the globe over the past 400 years.
I think the idea of settler colonialism does belong in that universe. I say in the book that it's a critical theory, which puts it in the same category as other kinds of critical theories, like the original Frankfurt School critical theory developed by Marxist cultural critics, or critical race theory. And what these kinds of critical theories have in common is that they are trying to explain what's wrong with society, what's the source of the evils in society, or what the critics perceive to be evils. And the answer is that they can be traced back usually to one basic central problem, whether that is class division or racism, or in the case of settler colonialism, it's the origin of the United States.
So what is the psychological need to feel guilty on behalf of the less fortunate? And how does it fulfill a psychological need to side with the less fortunate against your own group? Well, it's a way of demonstrating superiority. So I may write blog posts and create videos because I think I have a superior way of understanding current events compared to other commentators. And you may devote yourself to your family and to your religion because this you think is a superior way of living. So we all want to show our superiority. Other people primarily want to demonstrate their superiority not through conspicuous consumption, not through creating blog posts and videos, but by displaying conspicuous compassion. So we used to have sumptuary laws in Europe so that only people of a certain class could dress in a particular way. The human desire to demonstrate that you're superior to everyone else is pretty much a universal human need, but people display it differently depending on their life circumstances. And currently, our best educated tend to find it irresistible to put their conspicuous compassion for the less fortunate on display, and to find more and more ways of refining speech so that it's less hurtful to the less fortunate. And this is a way of feeling superior, just as I would expect that someone who observes Jewish law considers that a superior way of living, or other people believe in Jesus and they believe that salvation is through belief in Jesus, and so they feel superior by virtue of their assurance of heavenly salvation. So I think it comes out of this universal human need to feel superior. It just demonstrates itself in a particular way among the best educated in the West. It's an opportunity for conspicuous displays of compassion and sensitivity.
It's in European settlement and conquest. And starting from that premise, the theory allows you to sort of critique a whole wide range of things in American society, everything from capitalism to patriarchy to environmental problems.
So do I think the basis for it is narcissistic in nature? No. It becomes narcissistic, all right? It becomes a personality disorder when it is maladaptive to your life circumstances. You can live a really good life with this type of theorizing. So it's not a maladaptive type of theorizing ipso facto. For some people, it becomes maladaptive. But for other people, it is just part and parcel of an overall highly disciplined, highly reflexive perspective on life that in some circumstances is going to be a superior way of going through life. So, for example, during COVID, the liberal predisposition to follow the advice of experts, to my mind, was generally superior to the ipso facto knee-jerk conservative distrust of experts. So the liberal desire to feel and display compassion for the less fortunate in some circumstances is going to be highly adaptive, in other circumstances will be highly maladaptive. So it certainly does seem to lead to more mental illness than the conservative hero system, because you're placing your emphasis on things outside your control, such as the negative effects of racism and sexism and homophobia and Islamophobia. Right? That's outside your control. So liberalism in this time, in this place, United States of America and in the West, leads to much higher rates of mental illness than traditional and right-wing ways of viewing the world.
Anything that one might want to criticize can be formulated as a legacy of.
So how do we guide people who are so devoted to conspicuous consumption to a superior way of living? I think opening people up to the nature of their partisan hero system, and to open people up to acknowledgement of how their particular hero system is feeding their needs, and creating the question, would there be a superior way of living? Is there an adaptation to your hero system that will result in you being happier and more effective in life? So there are going to be circumstances where people on the right, where people with any hero system are going to become more adaptive and more happy and more successful and efficient by adapting their hero system.
Settler colonialism.
Right, and that's really well put, that critical theory is playing a big role. And I just want to kind of move in to this whole question of who's responsible in a way for the rise of this.
So I'm sure that there are more adaptive and less adaptive ways of being concerned with settler colonialism. All right, so having a mild predisposition to settler colonialism is unlikely to ruin your life. Right, having a mild sense of compassion towards the less fortunate is unlikely to ruin your life. It's when your political ideology exercises a disproportionate amount of your attention and your efforts. So if you're going along through life with a 1 out of 10, 2 out of 10 concern about settler colonialism, it's hard to imagine that that's terribly maladaptive for you. In fact, it would probably be adaptive for you in many sectors of life because it would enable you to better get along with your peers, right? If you primarily want to get along with your Orthodox Jewish family and friends and social circle and work circle, all right, then a predisposition to an Orthodox Jewish perspective on life is going to be adaptive. If you primarily want to get along with your evangelical family, friends, community, and work circle, then a more favorable view of the evangelical Christian worldview is going to be adaptive. On the other hand, if you're going through life with a 6 out of 10, 7 out of 10, 8 out of 10 intensity to a woke worldview, I would expect that that would severely predispose you to all sorts of anxieties and depressions and disappointments that are unnecessary.
This ideology, its propagation, because I had the similar conversation with Chris Rufo on his book, America's Cultural Revolution, and also Pluckrose and Lindsay's work as well on critical theory, which is that to what extent do you see
The interesting thing about Ronnie Goodman's book, Conservative Claims of Cultural Oppression, is that he uses left-wing critical theory and turns it around to analyze liberalism and the left using their own forms of critical theory. So it's a right-wing adaptation of a left-wing tool of demystification and decoding.
radicals, people who want to radically tear down and transform society, as the engine behind this? And to what extent, as I, in my book, I sort of, the argument I make is really that well-meaning, bleeding heart left liberals are actually the engine because they're a much larger group. To what extent do you think that, call it liberal group, is playing a role here in either accelerating or nodding through this ideology? And so I guess my question is, how important do you think the radical intellectuals are in all this, and how important is sort of the be kind, well-meaning type of liberal in all of this?
It's a good question. One thing that people sometimes ask is when you see students protesting on campuses, protesting about Gaza, and they're talking about settler colonialism, does that mean that they have actually read settler colonial theory, or do they really know what these ideas mean? And I think that, as with all different kinds of ideologies, there are people who know a great deal about it, and there are other people who only know the term or sort of a vague idea of what it means. That was always certainly true, for example, with Marxism. There were always people who would have described themselves as communists or socialists, but hadn't actually read Karl Marx, didn't know.
So I read a lot of Marxism between the ages of 20 to 22, and it was a high, because I felt like I had a superior way of understanding the world. I felt like I had a magic key to how the world works, and it enabled me to feel morally superior. And so people get a payoff from their ideologies. And if you don't get a payoff from your ideology, you'll likely look for another ideology unless you become so busy with your real concerns of what should be your real concerns of providing and protecting your family and spending time with friends and community.
What the theory said, but they knew that it was a theory about what was wrong with society. And I think that settler colonialism is not yet as popular as some other of these ideologies. I think it's still sort of.
So why do you think the college anti-Israel protests have died away? So I see two possibilities. One, that they've been disheartened by Israeli successes, or two, their minders have dialed back on the protests because they recognize that they will be bad for the prospects of a Kamala Harris election victory. So those are the two most likely reasons for why the campus protests, in my view, have been as weak as we've seen over the past few weeks.
Sort of just beginning to emerge. But it's definitely a phenomenon where things that start out very theoretical and in academic settings over time can transform the wider culture. And I think one example of the way that's been happening with this is the rise of land acknowledgements. Land acknowledgements are something that I think 5 years ago, no one in America.
Right. So land acknowledgements seem obviously maladaptive to me. Right. If you are doing a land acknowledgement, you're essentially saying that your government and your nation state lacks legitimacy, and using these rituals to invoke how flawed your system is doesn't seem to be an adaptive strategy for going through life. It seems incredibly self-defeating to the extent you take it seriously.
America had ever heard of. They were something that had sort of just started in Canada. And really within the space of just a few years.
Third possibility for the weakness of the anti-Israel protests is the punishments for being publicly opposed to Israel are beginning to sink in. And people recognize it's likely bad for their career prospects to be publicly anti-Israel.
Years, it became absolutely required for every university and most arts institutions to have a land acknowledgement, which is a statement basically saying this institution is on land that used to belong to a certain Native American tribe.
Right. All land used to belong to somebody else. Right. There is no spot on earth of which I'm aware that never belonged to a different people than the people currently occupying it. So why should people of European heritage be particularly exercised about something that is a universal human condition?
And to either sort of explicitly or implicitly apologize for being there. And you can see them on signs or websites, or sometimes they're recited out loud in public events. That sort of went from 0 to 100 very rapidly. And it's an example of how when an idea starts to seem appealing to maybe a larger liberal audience, that it can really become adopted very fast.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Just last night, I'm in Vancouver, Canada right now. I went to a soccer game, and these aren't pointy-headed university students or intellectuals. They did a land acknowledgement before a cup game. And that's the degree to which this is permeated. And in fact, 60% of Canadians believe the mass graves myth that there are 215 children buried at a residential school in Western Canada. I mean, the extent to which this has penetrated the consciousness of a lot of people is quite staggering, right? So I'm trying to sort of go from the seminar room to that level of influence. And one of the ways I can make sense of it is just that so many people just want to sort of be kind, be nice. And
right. So we used to talk commonly about illegal aliens, but then we had the development of the liberal hero system that no people is illegal and that we should just focus on these are our fellow human beings and they're in a difficult situation. So let's not call them illegal aliens. Let's just call them undocumented people. So they just forgot their documents to be in the country legally. Well, we used to talk about the homeless, and now elite discourse says we should not otherize the homeless. We should talk about them as people who are experiencing homelessness. And so we have all these new ways of talking that show that you're a member of the elect, that you're a member of the elite, that you've received a good education because you're showing your due sensitivity to the less fortunate.
And I actually think be nice and be kind is an ideology. It's not some sort of innocent thing. Actually, it's an ideology on its own, which is really sort of accelerating and force multiplying many of these radical ideas. And I think probably unless we actually start to get to grips with that, that's innocuous sounding niceness.
So I've gone back and forth, but in my life experience, the way I'm thinking about it right now, people who are nice are much more likely to be good. Right? It's relatively rare that I've encountered people who are nice and evil. So being nice and being kind, right, usually correlates with someone who's pretty morally decent. But of course, you can take any one moral value too far, and you can allow it to overwhelm other moral values.
I think we're going to be constantly facing this issue.
Well, one thing I say in the book is that both in the case of American history and in the case of the Middle East, the main thing I think that is behind the rise of settler colonial ideology is an indignation about injustice. And that's a good thing. That's a virtue. People are supposed to be indignant about injustices. And in fact, the same thing is true of most radical ideology.
But that's going to lead to a lot of mental problems, right? Because injustice is just rampant and it's inextricable part of the human condition. Everyone has reasons to feel victimized. Every group has reasons to feel victimized. And the more time and the more emotional commitment you put into things over which you have no control, right, the more vulnerable you are to mental health problems. So measuring America, measuring Australia, measuring Israel against an ideal of perfection, you'll always find ways that the country falls short. But obviously, no country can ever be perfect.
The same thing was true of communism, that it was based on indignation against injustice, exploitation of workers. The question is,
and the chat says, nice or polite, they're not the same thing, but they do seem to correlate in my experience, the way I'm thinking about it right now. Usually I find that polite people tend to be more likely than not to be nice people, and that nice people more likely than not tend to be decent people, and impolite people and not nice people more often than not tend to be less than decent.
What form does that indignation take, and does it lead to solutions, or does it actually lead to new and often worse injustices? To stick with the example of land acknowledgements for a minute, I think the reason why people have adopted land acknowledgements in this sort of broader liberal public that you're talking about has signed on to this idea, which at one point would have seemed very outlandish and then quickly became standard.
Right. To be polite, you have to constantly put a check on your impulses. And to be nice, you have to constantly put a check on your impulses. Right? We are naturally predisposed to tremendous selfishness. Just read a book that I've enjoyed, and I want to tell you about it. It came out in 2022. Optimally Irrational: The Good Reasons We Behave the Way We Do. So my bias is to look for the rational reasons for why people behave the way they do. I think it's just too easy, and you're not really getting all that you can learn from the world if you just dismiss people who have reactions different from you as, oh, they're just crazy. So it's a book by a University of Queensland economist. Optimally Irrational: The Good Reasons We Behave the Way We Do. It notes that the brain represents only 2% of an average adult's body weight, but consumes 20% of our energy. And so there are going to be some circumstances where having a larger brain that consumes more of your energy is going to be more adaptive to your environment, and other circumstances where that will be less adaptive. People tend to believe that living in sunny California will make them happier, but people living in California are not actually happier. So this is called focusing illusion. The idea that we will be happy with the next move to a better location, a better job, a better looking car, but in the end, nothing will make as much difference as you think. That strikes me as profound. Success at attracting a partner depends on the ability to look like a good option relative to the other options available. So there are very good reasons why we're constantly comparing ourselves. We need to do it for information, right? People around us possessing knowledge that we need to get. We need to do it for connection. Who around us can we form bonds with, and can we turn to in times of trouble? So there are many very sound reasons why we care about our relative success. And so there's a reason why we're constantly judging and choosing other people as comparison points to look at our own lives and to consider whether or not we are moving ahead or moving backwards. Now, you can do this in adaptive or maladaptive fashion, but you can never graduate from comparing yourself to other people. But keeping it in a proper perspective, obviously, will be more adaptive than allowing it to drive you crazy. The biologist Robert Trivers wrote, I think in 1971, under certain conditions, natural selection favors altruistic behaviors because in the long run, they benefit the organism performing them, right? If you perform almost no altruistic acts, right, that's going to be really bad for your self-interest. Multi-party altruistic systems increased by many times the cognitive difficulties in detecting imbalances and deciding whether they're due to cheating or random factors. So we need to simplify, and so we develop rules of conduct. And when people when people break these rules, right, then it makes it easier to detect cheating. So natural selection may well favor the elaboration of norms of proper conduct. So pro-sociality, right, caring about the interests of other people, seems to be widespread across virtually all cultures. And neuroscience shows that when we witness someone suffering, we feel some of that suffering in our own head. Even purely self-interested players would rationally engage in sustained cooperation over time. If you have good reason to believe that you're going to have future interactions with other people, all right, you are strongly incentivized to engage in cooperation and some degree of altruism. We care about other people, right? We care about other people's outcomes. We care about other people's intentions, and we act as if caring about others and their intentions is required by the rules of morality that are objective, right? The way people live is according to the objective truth of their particular hero system. Right? People may say they believe that morality is relative, but that's not how we live. When we feel that we are being cheated or stolen from or taken advantage of, we all naturally react with anger. So relative morality is an intellectual construct. But when it comes to real life and someone's cheating you or ripping you off or harming you or threatening you, you can't help but react as if others are violating some objective moral truth. People tend to be kind with people who are kind to them and unkind with people who are unkind to them. People often seem to be motivated to do the right thing according to widely shared objective moral standards, even if nobody is affected by their decision. A person who never cooperates will be a poor player in social interaction. They will miss out on the opportunity of gains from cooperation. They'll be unable to get consistent benefits from uncooperative behavior because other people are not pushovers. The best way to play in repeated interaction is to care about others and what they get. So my therapist spent years trying to incentivize me to start caring about other people. I have consistently led a more selfish, self-obsessed life than was optimal for my own thriving. The past record of a player acts as their reputation, and that will determine whether people decide to cooperate with them or not. So my own reputation for selfishness has disincentivized many people to cooperate with me. We all tend to be cautious about who we allow into our life, right? We usually only allow people into our life if we have formed a view on their likelihood to cooperate with us in the future. And so we use other people's reputation based on their past actions to guide our decisions. We will inevitably have many social interactions, and the circumstances under which we interact will change frequently. So interactions will repeat, but specific payoffs and risks are going to vary over time. So we don't know the future circumstances where we will be interacting with people. And we don't know when our fate will depend upon the actions of our partners. So we are incentivized to look very carefully for people to partner with. We're going to look for people who are inclined to cooperate, and we're going to look for people upon whom we can rely no matter what happens. So we will look for people who show good moral character in their actions. So we care about other people's intentions, even though we can never fully know our own motives, let alone other people's motives, but a moderate degree of trying to see where someone's coming from, right? A moderate interest in other people's motivations can help us understand whether or not someone is a good fit for our life. Right, we're going to be participating in all sorts of intricate and constantly changing patterns of social interactions. So we're looking for, is this person someone to rely on? So we are incentivized to exchange information about other people's actions and their motives to find out what's really going on with them. Right, this is useful to ascertain whether somebody can be trusted as a cooperating partner. And this exchange of information is often called gossip, and it pervades social interactions. A person who does not take the time to think before deciding to help someone will be seen as nicer than someone who takes a long time making the same calculation and final decision to help. So splitting a bill at a restaurant equally without looking at everybody's costs and benefits is often preferred to the feeling of awkwardness associated with engaging in the required accounting. Mutual gifts allow potential partners to signal to each other an intent to engage in long-term cooperation in opposition to a care for simply short-term costs and benefits. I remember I met a friend who lived nearby me, and I was 16 at the time, and we developed a game of golf in his backyard, and I got us betting on the game, and I ended up winning $10. And then to my shock, my friend when we went inside, turned to his father and said, "Hey, do you have $10? I just lost $10 to Luke in a game of golf." And I was so embarrassed. I said, no, forget about it. And the father says, "That's very wise, right? You don't want to lose a potential friend for just $10. Right? We will tend to punish norm violators, right? And our punishments will usually begin with mockery. So we will signal to people that they are deviating from socially accepted norms. So in Australia and in England, there is a culture of buying a drink for the whole group, right? It's called, this round's on me. And you have this in America too. And if you're someone who avoids stepping up, right, if you develop the reputation of being cheap, right, that would not be good for your social standing. So if you don't tend to pay for your friends' drinks, right, you will be at the receiving end of jokes about your stinginess. If the mockery does not work, you'll get stauncher punishments, right? You will be shunned, right? If you forget to contribute your fair share, others will not invite you to social occasions. We will see our moral preferences usually as objective truths, not as preferences. And we will see actions that violate our rules as unambiguously bad, right? Not just because we have preferences, but because it is objectively bad. Now, this can come with significant downsides because we're very likely to get in the habit of writing tickets for people for breaking our unenforceable rules. And this will lead to resentment, and a life filled with resentment is not usually a happy life. So we tend to feel that our moral norms, that our hero system is morally objective. And this belief in the objectivity of our moral hero system is easier to support with a belief in God, who bestows these laws through a Bible. Even secular ethical philosophies will still work in real life as objective moral rules. All right, so you'll get philosophies such as individuals have natural rights, right? That's a secular approach, that there are objective moral norms, people have objective natural rights. You will tend to trust people more in business transactions if you know that they believe that unfair deals are forbidden by some kind of objective moral rule. If people understand moral behavior as the unconditional respect of rules, then observing somebody following rules in one context is often a good predictor of what this person would do in another context. And the objectivity of the rule will help people to coordinate their expectations. So it makes sense that wide swaths of people will believe in objective morality. There are good reasons why people should follow commonly understood and unshared rules. Acting as if these rules are objective facilitates cooperation. We now often live in large cities, and that offers interactions with strangers that may very well be one shot. But this is a novel and unusual type of interaction on the vast timescale of human history. Most of our ancestors lived in small groups of up to 150 people for tens of thousands of years. There is no contradiction between our moral attitudes and an evolutionary explanation. Evolution does not necessarily select for selfish preferences. It's more likely that evolution led us to have moral preferences to help us navigate successfully the opportunities of repeated cooperation with others. We have these moral feelings that are genuine. That's the proximal cause. The idea of explaining them as instrumental and an ultimate cause will very likely feel distasteful.
Is that it's an expression of indignation against a historical injustice. And if you are a good moral person, you look at the history of European settlement of North America and you say, this was highly destructive of Native American lives and cultures, and many people were killed and their homes were taken over. Why would you not be for acknowledging that? Why would you not sort of make that put that at the center of the national identity? And I think it's a difficult argument to make, to say land acknowledgements, for example, are not telling us anything new that we don't already.
Okay, let's go to the chat. Tim Walz went on Fox News. So that is a massive communications change on the part of the Kamala Harris campaign. And I would expect they'd only do such a change if they recognize that they are, to some degree, in trouble. Chat says, being nice isn't necessarily a show of impulse control. Many people are nice because they lack sufficient courage to respond more forcefully to others. That is an excellent point. 2 days of Jewish holidays followed by the Sabbath is insane, but other people say, look, after all the insanity of the past few weeks, I needed that extra day of detox. It depends on the quality of your relations with other people. If you are spending these days of holidays with people that you love, they're going to be quite pleasant, and you're going to be more down with having these days of holidays. If you're not spending the time with people you love, then it will be much more of a burden. Why do evolutionary psychology people think the natural selection behaves rationally or takes the rational path towards something? Because it provides more ground for trying to understand the world around us and how we got here. So simply dismissing people's choices as ipso facto irrational, it reduces how much we can learn about life. Back to this book, Optimally Irrational. Humans are social animals. We are helpless alone. We face large potential benefits from cooperation. Right? Overwhelmingly, people are going to be better off living in connection with other people rather than trying to live alone. It's reasonable to expect that people will have evolved preferences helping them to interact with others in ways that are mutually beneficial. This is why people likely care about other people's fates, why they care about others' intentions, why they care about following fairness rules that in a given social context will point to commonly accepted ways to share the benefits and costs from cooperation. Neuroscience shows that brain regions are activated when we observe other people's emotions, such as pain, and that they overlap with those activated when we experience the same emotions ourselves. Many strategic situations, it can hurt you to have too many choices at your disposition. So having fewer choices will often enable you to make better decisions. Anger is often helpful in a wide range of situations where it creates a credible threat that deters other people from taking advantage of you. Right? You're probably going to be more reluctant to take advantage of someone who displays a fearsome amount of anger. People are willing to engage in costly behavior to retaliate when they feel they have been wrong. So one reason I have been able to speak out on controversial issues and to blog my thoughts on controversial issues is that I am willing to go hard when people go hard at me. Right? If I simply folded when people went hard at me, all right, I could not have been blogging and speaking publicly about controversial issues. So people know when they take me on and they go hard against me that I'm going to be quite likely to come right back at them. Now, this could seem as irrational at first sight, but displays of anger provide a benefit. It makes your threat of retaliation credible. People know you are likely to carry on a threat if you have angry feelings. An even better solution than showing signs of anger when one is wronged is to build a reputation for anger and retaliatory behavior to deter others from trying to wrong you. So I've deterred other people from taking easy, cheap shots at me because I do fight back. Building such a reputation makes sense in situations where the rule of law is fragile and where opportunities of wrongdoing against you are frequent. Prisoners who are not part of a group risk end up at the bottom of this hierarchy. Low positions in the prison social order may lead to being the target of systematic violence. Right? If you're an easy mark, people are going to try to take advantage of you. In such an environment, some criminals engage in acts of self-harm, such as lacerating their arm with a knife, to build a reputation for irrationality and unpredictability. An effective strategy to make a threat of retaliation credible is to convince your opposition that you are not rational. You could possibly retaliate disproportionately in case of limited aggression. An important condition for it to work is for you to be able to send credible signals of anger to inform other parties that you likely will act upon your threats. The emotion of guilt, with the visible cues it generates, such as blushing or shrinking, will credibly signal to other people that you are trustworthy and you know what the right thing to do is, and you feel bad that you didn't do the right thing. The common psychological assumption that one feels guilt even when one behaves badly in private is based on the fact that many transgressions are likely to become public knowledge. All sorts of behaviors that I thought would stay private would become public, and I would feel a great deal of embarrassment. Like anger and guilt, the strength of feeling of love can bind an individual's behavior in a way that eliminates many options, right? Love will act as a commitment device. When in love, people feel and act as if their partner is the only person they value in the world. They not only neglect other possible partners, they often purposefully stay away from other partners. People ready to sacrifice themselves usually do it for a group to which they belong and that they represent. Right? Members of ethnic, cultural, and religious groups will often go to great cost to mask their identity to a group. All right, I go around wearing a yarmulke. This comes at a significant cost. Right, it is something of a disturbance to the realm around me if nobody else is wearing a yarmulke. So I am signaling a high commitment to Orthodox Judaism. They will follow norms from their group even when they live in foreign countries. They may show great care for key symbols of their group like a flag or an anthem or a yarmulke. Feeling of being part of a group raises strong emotions that are not simply about morality or religious values. So there are often feelings of elation when sharing positive moments as part of a crowd. Whether you're singing in a church or cheering after your team's victory, there are feelings of pride when one's group is successful. And of course, there are feelings of anger against others who hurt or disrespect your group. Individuals with a high in-group identity do not go out of their way usually to harm the interests of members of other groups, right? Such behavior is mainly seen in situations where there is conflict with another group. In the absence of conflict, individuals will favor the members of their own group, but they will generally act in a neutral way towards members of other groups. Group membership does not just influence behavior, it also influences perception, right? Orthodox Jews tend to see the world in certain common ways. Evangelicals tend to see the world in certain common ways. Secular humanists tend to see the world in common ways. Once you are part of a given group, people will overestimate how much people from other groups are alike, right? People look like different individuals in their own group, but people will tend to seem alike when they're members of outgroups. So adopting cultural symbols and following specific cultural practices, such as keeping kosher, are visible signs of membership to an in-group, as well as a signal to outgroup individuals. So belonging to a group requires behaving in a certain way. And disrespecting the symbols and practices of your group will raise suspicions about your allegiance to your group. Such practices may seem inconsequential at first, such as what you eat or what you wear, but when imbued with a group membership meaning, these practices become a litmus test of group loyalty. All right, you can't belong to Orthodox Judaism and publicly violate the laws of kosher and the laws of the Sabbath. Right, even those group members who don't care much about the practices themselves will often carefully respect them in public to not raise doubts about their attitude towards their in-group. Now, we all will have many different identities. When we choose between identities, we will usually take into account the status associated with each identity. So when we choose to emphasize a particular identity, often we will trade off the benefits of adopting this identity, given the relative status of the group and the costs of adopting this identity. Identification with a national identity that has a higher average status and a greater ethnic homogeneity may see its appeal grow. So this is perhaps why we have a growth of nationalist parties, because we've got a steady migration of voters away from supporting left-wing parties with redistributive social welfare policies. People feel like an ethnic homogeneous identity is more prestigious than identity based around government redistribution of resources. Groups opposed to each other, such as sports fans, ethnic groups, or political factions, will express hatred at each other in a way that seems not to make sense in modern societies. People engaged in violent group conflicts are often perceived as senseless, but another way to look at it is this is a propensity to be swept by such feelings, and this is part of who we are. It's a ghost of ancient times, where readiness to stick up for one's group and to violently fight other groups was key for survival. So our emotional apparatus to violently react on behalf of our group is probably designed to accompany a greater level of antagonism than would usually be optimal now in the first world. Evolutionary psychologist Jeffrey Miller had a good tweet in 2019. Most things that seem irrational don't seem so irrational once you understand signaling theory. We're all constantly signaling. I wear a yarmulke, that signals. I'm wearing a dress shirt with a collar, that sends a signal. Humans are equipped with the most complex language among all animals on Earth. It allows us to communicate our knowledge and ideas to others, but human communication does not take the form of a simple exchange of clear statements between people. In many cases, people use not words but actions to communicate with others. Other times, we do not say explicitly what we want to say. We will use innuendos and euphemisms. So these features of communication may seem strange and irrational, only if we ignore that our means of communication are primarily designed to negotiate our interactions with others. In this process, transparent communication sometimes not enough to influence others. It's sometimes not desirable when people may react adversely to our intentions.
We know about the history of the United States. Everyone who goes to school learns about American settlement in elementary school. And in fact, all you have to do is look at a map of the United States and see how many Native American names are on the map to know that America was founded as European colonization of a land that other people already lived in. But when you say that sort of the first thing that you hear at a public event like a soccer game or a theatrical performance or a university occasion is a statement acknowledging, saying, we don't belong on this land, and in a certain sense, our civilization is illegitimate because of the way we got here. I think that that is a bad influence on the way people think about their society, about their country. It sort of sets the precedent for thinking this country should not exist. There's something fundamentally wrong with the way this country came into being, and in a truly moral world, it would not exist. And I think that that is the basic insight at the heart of settler colonialism. It's saying, in a truly moral world, there would never have been European settlement of North America. By extension, in a truly moral world, there would never have been the creation of a state of Israel because it involved dispossessing.
So I love this analysis because it enables you to seek out the rational reasons for why people may seem to behave in an irrational way. So if you recognize the quirkiness of human interactions, you look for the rational basis for them, and you may well see that they are adaptive responses to the complexity of many of our social interactions. We have a strong incentive to try to manage to the best of our ability other people's impressions. Right? Other people will always have imperfect information about us, and the beliefs that other people have about us will matter significantly for our own fortunes. In a heterosexual couple, the asymmetry in parental investment in offspring means that women are usually far more wary of the sincerity of the stated dedication of potential male partners than the reverse. So the time spent by a man in courtship is a credible signal of interest because it is costly. Courtship is usually socially transparent, right? You usually don't get to court several women at the same time. So courtship signals a man's willingness to forego alternative opportunities in a partnership. Courtship also frequently features gifts to the courted woman, such as flowers and jewelry. So you will often make costly gifts to your intended female partner. The gifts need to be costly to signal a credible intent from a long-term partnership, right? A man will not usually make such gifts repeatedly to other women at the same time, but these gifts will also usually have low resale value, right, to protect men from being taken advantage of by women collecting valuable gifts without a real intention of becoming a partner. Engaging in any talk takes time and requires significant cognitive costs. So through short, costly acts of discussion, people signal to each other their shared consideration. Nietzsche says, those who know they are deep strive for clarity. Those who would like to seem deep to the crowd strive for obscurity. So the obscurity of much of writing is often just a signaling trick used by writers to try to look better than they are. When people speak, they will often insinuate their intent indirectly rather than stating it as a broad proposition. So sexual come-ons, veiled threats, polite requests, concealed bribes often are more effective when they are done indirectly. Human communication invariably involves a mixture of cooperation and navigation of conflict. People tend to exhibit systematically self-serving biases in their beliefs. Most people tend to think that they are better, smarter, and nicer than they are. They will attribute their success to themselves and their failures to external factors. They will rationalize their errors and misdeeds, and they will cast a critical judgment on others' misdeeds. So people, surely they're just lousy at forming judgments about themselves and the world. On the other hand, you can explain these belief distortions by the fact that evolution likely selected us to form not accurate beliefs, but useful beliefs. So overconfidence, overpessimism, and warped reasoning may be selected features of our cognition, giving us advantages in a range of situations.
Palestinian Arabs. And as far as that goes, it's easy to agree with. The question is it possible to play back history in such a way that all the injustices that go to make up our current world are undone, right? Is it possible?
And the chat notes, if Europeans had not colonized America, surely China, Arabs, Japan, or others would have done so when given the opportunity a century later. Well, other groups within what became America would have done it, right? There were different tribes that were constantly colonizing and conquering each other. Yeah, I noticed that Norwegians and the Normans have not been asked to pay reparations to England.
Possible to do that, and what would be the result if we did try to do it? And I think that the response to the Hamas attack is a great example of how this idea that starts out seeming very moral ends up in an immoral place, because it's saying, well, if the ultimate evil is settler colonialism and Israel is a settler colonial country, then anyone who attacks Israel and Israelis is doing something good, serving a virtuous cause, and therefore they should be applauded. And, the same logic held for, why did the Soviets slaughter millions of peasants? Because they were trying to create a classless society. Therefore, it was a virtuous thing to do.
So in biological terms, this can be explained by the concept of niche construction, meaning that every form of life tries to create an environment around it which is best suited for its thriving. And so in some circumstances, this will mean expanding and conquering. And so colonialism is just another aspect of niche construction. Every form of life wants to create an environment most conducive to its own thriving. This is true for Black people, for Jews, for Mexicans, for the Japanese, to pond scum. Every form of life engages in niche construction.
This is obviously on a much smaller scale, but it ends up being a moral impulse that turns immoral in the way that it is expressed and applied.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. I don't know if you've seen Paul Bloom's book Against Empathy, Yale political philosopher, but one of the points he makes is when we're talking about empathy for certain groups, the flip side of which is antipathy towards the groups that are oppressing those groups that we're empathetic towards, this is often highly selective, right? So we might feel empathy for, Palestinians, but not for Jews. We might feel empathy for someone who wants to transition their gender, but not to the person who wants to detransition and who accuses the medical authorities of not having safeguarded them, right? So it's always selective in terms of who is it that you are feeling empathetic towards, and I can't help but feel that's provided by ideology. So for example, as you point out in the book, there is really no scrutiny of what the Comanches did to the Apaches and the Iroquois did the Hurons, and this sort of context, this global world historical context of genocide and slavery and settler colonialism. And I was just wondering, was there ever a time when things were a bit more contextualized and a bit more nuanced?
Well, it's definitely true that, I think what's interesting about it is that in a strange way, this way of thinking about history is precisely not about empathy. It's devoid of empathy. What it really is about is a conversation among, in this case, settlers themselves, about the kind of people they are and the kind of people they want to be. So land acknowledgements, again, is a good example. When an institution does a land acknowledgement, they're in no way, shape, or form saying, we intend to vacate this land and return it to the native people who lived here before America was settled. They're not saying that they have any legal, moral, economic, political obligation to fulfill to actually make people's lives better. It's a statement saying we are morally so sort of sensitive and empathetic that we recognize how bad this is, and in saying that, we become better than other people who don't recognize it. And one of the things that I say in the book, and that's pointed out by a number of scholars of settler colonialism, people who are critical of the discipline, is that it's really a conversation among settlers about being a settler rather than a conversation about Native peoples. One of the sort of ironies is that if you look at how Native American groups in the U.S. advance their demands in advocacy groups or legal rights groups, they don't use terms like settler colonialism or decolonization. They talk about things like adhering to treaty obligations, forcing the United States to live up to its promises. So it's not really a Native-led or driven movement. It's an academic theory movement.
Right. If your group's interests are going to be best served by getting other parties to live up to treaty obligations, then that's what you'll talk about. If your group's interests are best served by violating your group's treaty obligations, then you'll make the case for violating.
That's created largely by humanities professors in Australia, the United States, and Canada. And the people who are most vocal.
So it seems to me that there are certain ways that humanity professors make their arguments that are not entirely rational or logical or particularly compelling. There just seems to be a particular style to humanity professors and their arguments. But I wish I could find a good explanation for me, the generally unimpressive nature of their political arguments. Perhaps it's just way too broad of a theory that I've got here.
About it and who it really appeals to are people who see themselves as settlers and sort of embrace that identity and use it as a form of self-scrutiny. It's a way of saying, what kinds of guilt and sin have I inherited by being a settler, and how can I purge myself of them? And in that way, there's an analogy to the way that critical race theory often leads white writers to talk about whiteness, right, rather than to talk about blackness or black people. It's really about whiteness being an evil, and how do I purge myself of this evil? It's similar with settler identity, and in some places, I think this is more common in Canada than it is here in the U.S., but it's sort of, I think, beginning to spread. It's common for people to identify themselves as a settler, to say, my name is so-and-so and I am a settler, in the same way that you would say my institution is X university and it stands on the lands of this tribe. In fact, one thing I quote in the book is a piece by a Canadian First Nations writer who says that he and his friends say that settler is a new way of saying white, that it's the way white people.
Yeah, so we're talking about a sophisticated version of revulsion towards white people. Let's have a look at what's going on in my X bookmarks. Right, this is New York. Right, this is New York with illegals. So, okay, let me. Right, here we are in what used to be the particularly prestigious and wealthy part of Johannesburg, South Africa. Now, since the fall of apartheid, it's a mess. Right, the anti-colonial sentiment has won out. The United States and European Union have faced similar challenges over the past 2 decades, but of the two, it's America that's found a way to surge ahead. When it's come to things that create wealth, such as science, innovation, and the birth rate, the United States is way ahead. So here's an article, 7 ways the US is beating Europe. Diversity, equity, inclusion was dialed down 90% after October 7 and the reaction to the Gaza war. This was not organic. A whole bunch of switches were purposefully flipped off. There's a huge coordinated apparatus that produces this stuff. It should never be taken at face value. And Frederick Cruz, right, he argued that the allegations about the former Penn State defensive coordinator Jerry Sandusky were all a lie. Here is Kamala Harris's husband, Slugger Doug, lecturing Americans on misogyny. At the same moment, the press breaks the story of his beating up a past girlfriend, same guy who impregnated his nanny while he was married and made her get an abortion. The new perception of masculinity. Let's see what I've got on my Twitter feed. What's the point of rebuilding Gaza as long as it is incentivized to wage war on Israel? Does Israel have a winning strategy for reducing and crippling Iranian power? If America withdrew from the Middle East, which very likely would be a smart strategy because America does not have any vital interests in the Middle East, could Israel survive? One of the best historical precedents for Israel's seven-front war, the best that I could come up with, were some of Prussia's wars, where they had multi-front wars and they had to switch back and forth. How the push to avert a broader war in Lebanon? Well, I'd expect that the parties with the most skin in the game to be decisive. In this case, Israel, because Israel only has to be wrong once with regard to its adversaries to disappear. Right? How might regime change in Iran occur? Open question, because polls consistently show 80% of the population opposes the Islamist regime. What would it take for Lebanon to get Hezbollah under control? Hezbollah has held Lebanon hostage just as pro-terror Muslims hold Islam hostage. When you have a willingness to kill your enemies, that multiplies your power over those less willing to kill. Thinking about the classic movie, The Battle of Algiers, came out in 1966, where the French leader in Algiers said, "There are 400,000 Arabs in Algiers. Are they all our enemies? We know they're not. But a small minority holds sway by means of terror and violence. We must deal with this minority to isolate and destroy it." And in the same movie, the colonel says, "Should we remain in Algeria," meaning France? "If you answer yes, then you must accept all the necessary consequences. So should Jews remain in Israel? If you answer yes, then you must accept all the necessary consequences. Do you want your people to survive? If you answer yes, then you must accept all the necessary consequences." If you begin with the supposition that Israel must survive and be safe, then anything that leads to those goals becomes, in different circumstances, licit. Ritual acknowledgement that your people are illegitimate and stole land from another people seems like a bad strategy. And Ronnie Goodman notes, there is no centrist morality, because a centrist is merely a biconceptual, in whom the two systems have established themselves in equal proportion, or in whom the two systems operate only on a general level without having securely colonized the synaptic connections associated with particular spheres. This is why centrists can find themselves going back and forth on issues. What conservatives ultimately seek is to subdue in liberalism is presuppositions to the transcendence of all hero systems, the one big lie from which the smaller ones emanate. Conservative claimants of cultural oppression see themselves not only as the losers in a war of ideas that was always rigged against them, but furthermore as a quasi-ethnic group being encroached upon by a foreign colonial power that is endlessly contemptuous of their native folkways and bent on replacing those with its own arbitrary cultural preferences.
People identify themselves instead of saying white. But it's worth noting also that in the American context, you don't have to be white to be a settler, because in the idea of settler colonialism as a theory is that America is a settler society, and so everyone in the society who's not indigenous is a settler, and that can go to places where people don't necessarily expect. For example, you could be the descendant of an African slave, or you could be someone who just immigrated to this country 5 years ago, and you'd still be a settler in the sense that you occupy the settler position in the power structure, in the way society imagines itself. And in that sense, this is a very different way of thinking about American history than multiculturalism. Multiculturalism.
Okay, here is Mike Doran making the case for why the United States needs to remain in the Middle East.
The Middle East is the crossroads of the world. It's the center of gravity of the global energy system. It is if any power that wants to dominate Eurasia, as China does, and China thinks it could possibly dominate Eurasia together with Iran and Russia, wants to control the Middle East, because then they'll have a stranglehold on all of the supplies to Europe. So if we think that Europe is central to a sound European economy and strong political and economic ties with Europe is basic to our defense, and I think any serious thinker about foreign policy would come to that conclusion.
Okay, I'm skeptical of what Doran is saying here.
Then you have to realize that we have to have a position in the Middle East too. We have to keep Russia, China, and Iran from dominating the Middle East, because they'll have a stranglehold on the oil supplies to our allies in Europe, but also to our allies in East Asia. All of the East Asian rivals of China. Japan, South Korea, Australia, they're all India. They're all dependent on oil and gas that either comes from the Middle East or transits through it. So there's just no way to hold on to our global status if we give up on the Middle East. If we want to reduce our military footprint in the region, then we have to do it by building up allies who have military capabilities. And the number one ally that fits that bill is Israel. After October 7th, it looked like for a moment, because of all the difficulties in Gaza, it looked like Israel couldn't play that role. Now we see, I think in the last few weeks, it can play that role.
So my mouth is just so dry today. Is that the Adderall that because I had my weekly cup of coffee? What the heck is going on? 7 ways the United States is beating Europe.
7 ways the US is beating Europe. Scan the economic data and it's easy to see why Europeans have reason to look on with envy at their friends across the Atlantic. Brussels, the United States and the European Union have faced similar challenges over the past couple of decades, with the financial crash and the COVID pandemic wreaking economic havoc, taking years to recover from. But of the two, it's America that has found a way to surge ahead. When it comes to things that create wealth, science, innovation, even a higher birth rate, the US is ahead by most metrics. The EU is trying to change that. It hired the former European Central Bank chief Mario Draghi to deliver a report into all that was wrong and everything that needs to be done about it. A year and 400 pages later, the verdict was clear. The gap between the EU and US is only growing. Drastic measures are called for. We didn't need him to tell us that. The numbers speak for themselves.
So the gap between the United States and other superpowers is growing, right? The United States economy is booming. Our military power is enormous compared to those exhibited by China and Russia and competitors, right? The United States is on a path to be more powerful in relative terms in 5 years than it is now, in 10 years than it is now, for 50 years than it is now.
Sure, Europe's cities are unmatched, its architecture gorgeous, food and wine delicious, and who doesn't like taking all of August off the way many Europeans do? To say nothing of universal health care. But the economics don't look good. Politico took a closer look at the numbers. 1. Americans are richer. Setting cliches about money and happiness aside, Americans are, on average, richer than Europeans. That's been true for a long time, but the worrying thing for the EU is that the gap is getting wider. In 1990, US gross domestic product, GDP, per capita was 16% higher than the Eurozone's. By 2023, the difference had doubled, to more than 30%. Exclamation mark function, use strict, window.add event listener message.
What the heck?
Function A, if void
Stop
0
that.
exclamation mark he.
Oh, bloody hell.